Before sunrise, truckers swerved and horns screamed. A blind 11-year-old boy was walking alone down a busy country road, clutching a battered backpack like his life depended on it. When veteran Officer Janelle Ramirez reached him, she found more than fear. Inside that pack were worn letters and a Braille Bible, a map his late mother left to guide him to safety if home ever turned dangerous. What happened next would unravel secrets, expose neglect, and lead to a reunion that almost didn't happen. How did one child's courage and a stranger's decision to stop change everything? Before we continue with this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel, as we have a special story that'll be released soon. The morning air along County Road 9 was cool, but heavy with the smell of oil and damp pavement. A fine mist clung to the grass in the ditch, turning to faint silver under the first light pushing up from the horizon. Cars flew past in steady bursts, headlights low, wipers squeaking across windshields, radios faintly audible for a moment before each vehicle surged ahead and disappeared. At first, there was nothing unusual about the scene, just another thin two-lane strip of asphalt stretching toward town. But then, against the gray shoulder, there was movement that didn't fit the rhythm of commuters, a small shape no taller than the hood of a sedan, moving with halting precision, the tip of a white cane tapping for the edge of the road. The boy's jacket was too light for the hour, zipped up to his chin as though he'd tried to trap what warmth he could. Dust clung to the hem of his jeans, and his sneakers, scuffed and frayed, fell for each step before committing his weight. The cane swung in short arcs, its plastic tip scraping against gravel and asphalt, then back again. Behind dark glasses, his face was turned slightly toward the sound of approaching engines. Each car's rush of air pushed his hood back a little, tossed the hair at his temples. Some drivers honked. Quick, irritated bursts of sound that made him flinch but didn't stop him. Brake lights flashed once or twice, but no one pulled over. They passed in blurs of color and metal, leaving him to the noise and wind. The road was busy in that particular early morning way. Box trucks on delivery runs, sedans carrying shift workers, a few pickups with ladders tied down in the back. No one wanted to be late. No one wanted to risk the confusion of stopping. He moved on, slow but steady, feeling for the edge of the shoulder. His left hand stayed clamped to the strap of the backpack slung across his chest. Every few steps, he paused as if to listen, tilting his head toward the traffic, then adjusted and went on. Sometimes the mist broke into fine drizzle and dampened his hair, but he didn't pull up his hood. He kept moving forward. A semi rolled past close enough that the blast of air shoved him sideways. He stumbled, found the ground again with his cane, and took one long breath through his nose until the tremor left his shoulders. Behind the glasses, his jaw clenched and relaxed. He moved on. A minivan slowed, matching his pace for a moment. The driver's face turned in curious concern, but then a horn sounded from behind. The van sped up, and the boy was alone again, footsteps soft on the wet shoulder. There was a strange stillness just beyond the noise, the kind that lives in someone who knows how to be invisible. He walked like someone used to mapping danger with his ears, like someone who had learned that waiting for kindness could be riskier than moving alone. His fingers worried at the zipper of the backpack every few steps, checking it, making sure whatever was inside hadn't shifted or fallen. Once, when a gust of wind shoved at him hard enough to make the cane skid, he reached back and touched the bag with both hands, a quick, instinctive check, then resumed. Every now and then he whispered something under his breath. No words loud enough for passing drivers to hear. Maybe directions, maybe comfort. His chin lifted, as if orienting toward a sound or a memory only he could hear. The traffic thinned and thickened again. A crow perched on the guardrail ahead, watching until the boy came close, then flapped away with a dry caw. By the time the first streaks of sunlight slid across the road, his breath was fogging in short bursts. His pace slowed as if fatigue had begun to catch up to him. A car swerved to avoid a pothole and came closer than the rest. The tires hissed on wet pavement and threw grit against his shoes. He stopped for the first time, perfectly still, the cane planted firmly in the gravel. His hand tightened on the backpack strap until his knuckles went pale. He stood that way a long moment, waiting for the sounds to sort themselves, for the tremor in his chest to settle. Then, as if reminding himself there was no other option, he started forward again. Another mile of shoulder stretched ahead, empty and uncertain, and still no one stopped. The call came in just after sunrise, when the dispatch room still felt half asleep. The low buzz of police radios, the hum of fluorescent lights, the smell of burnt coffee, everything carrying the slow rhythm of a small town waking up. Dispatch operator Karen Lowe was finishing her first cup when the phone line lit up red. She answered on instinct voice level. 911, what's your emergency? What came back wasn't the usual tremor of panic, but a deep, steady man's voice edged with unease. Yeah, I'm on County Road 9. Mile marker. Hang on. A pause, the rustled paper, or maybe a GPS unit beeping faintly. Marker 42. There's a kid out here, walking right along the shoulder. Alone. Karen straightened, pen hovering above the notepad even before she thought of what to write. A child? Walking where exactly? Right on the side. Little thing. Cane in his hand. White one. Pretty sure he's blind. That last word pressed against the calm of the room. Karen's free hand drifted to the keyboard, tapping location codes. Is he in the lane? Not yet, the man said. His breath hitched. She heard the low rumble of his idling diesel through the receiver. But he's close. Cars flying by. Nearly clipped by a box truck a minute ago. Scared me just watching. Karen's training told her to keep him talking while she dispatched. Her other hand was already pushing the called patrol, flagging Officer Janelle Ramirez, who'd just cleared a traffic stop. All right, sir. Stay with me. Are you stopped? Yeah, he said reluctantly. But I can't block the shoulder forever. Truxel. His words cut as another horn blared close to the line. Damn fools flying. Kid didn't flinch, though. Just keeps walking. Karen swallowed a wave of something that wasn't quite fear, but wasn't routine either. Children alone on highways didn't happen here. Blind ones, never. Can you tell how old? She asked. 10? 11 maybe. Backpack. Kinda small. Karen's screen beeped as she entered the details. Her voice stayed soft and steady, but her pulse quickened. You're doing great. Stay behind him at a safe distance if you can. Officers on the way. Another pause. She heard the low grind of gears as the truck repositioned. Copy that. God, he looks so lost but not lost, you know? Like he knows where he's going but doesn't know what's around him. Karen didn't answer that. Training told her to avoid emotional hooks, but her stomach tightened anyway. She toggled the radio. Unit 27, be advised. Juvenile male, possible visual impairment, walking eastbound Shoulder County Road 9 near marker 42. Caller in semi following at safe distance. The radio cracked alive almost instantly. 27 copy. Ramirez's voice came through, calm, seasoned. ETA 4 minutes. Karen exhaled slowly, forced herself to check other screens. Weather clear but damp from overnight drizzle. Traffic moderate. She muted the trucker briefly and called out across the room to the second dispatcher. Patch me another line for social services standby, just in case. She didn't know why she said it so early. Procedure wouldn't usually jump there, but something in the trucker's voice, that word blind, the way he'd said scared me just watching, told her this wasn't going to be a simple ride home. She unmuted him. Sir, patrol's almost there. You doing okay? I guess. He's slowing down now. Kinda tapping the ground more. Good. Just stay back. She heard his engine idling low, the distinctness of air brakes as he kept the rig crawling. You said he's got a backpack? Yeah, big for him. Hugging it like it's keeping him upright. Karen made another note. She didn't know why that detail lodged so firmly. Maybe because she imagined a kid clinging to whatever he had left. 2-7 to dispatch. Ramirez cut in. Visual on subject. Karen let out the breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Copy, 2-7. Caller. Patrol's on scene now. You can break off when safe. The man's relief was audible. Good. Thank you. Tell her watch the traffic. Some fools aren't slowing. Karen gave a final thank you and disconnected, but she didn't move right away. Her screen still glowed with the notes she'd typed. Blind boy, backpack, alone. She should have gone back to routine. Radio logs, next call. But something about the image stayed fixed behind her eyes. Maybe because kids wandering roads usually meant trouble no one saw coming. Maybe because a blind child didn't just end up miles out of town by accident. On the radio, Ramirez's calm voice reported, "Making contact. Boy appears uninjured but frightened. Stand by." Karen clicked her pen twice without realizing it, then set it down and folded her hands flat to stop the restless movement. Her monitor beeped softly, but she didn't look away from the active call log. She told herself it was just another assist, just another strange morning thing. But deep down, a quiet part of her gut whispered what experience had taught her. The scariest calls are often the ones that start small and calm, with a single line of ordinary words. There's a kid on the road. Officer Janelle Ramirez had been on the job long enough to know that most calls about a kid on the road were misunderstandings. Teenagers walking after a fight at home, a runaway cooling off until someone picked him up. But the dispatch notes on her screen were different. Asterisk blind boy. Backpack. Busy shoulder. Asterisk the description slid under her skin in a way few things did anymore. She flicked her turn signal and merged onto County Road 9, the cruiser's tires humming as the speedometer climbed. Low sun striped the asphalt, bright enough to make her squint. Mist still hung over the fields. Every dip in the road seemed to hold its own pale pool of light. Her pulse jumped when she saw the semi crawling along the shoulder a quarter mile ahead. Hazard lights winking. Just beyond its massive grille, something small and still moved with a deliberate rhythm. Tap, sweep, step. Tap, sweep, step. She slowed, dropped her window, and let the sound of the cane reach her. There was no mistaking it. That blind traveler's way of mapping the unseen world one cautious step at a time. But this was no city sidewalk with curbs and crosswalks. It was 2 lanes of impatient early traffic and blind hills where cars appear with no warning. She flipped her lights on but kept the siren silent. No need to startle him into the lane. Cars ahead braked and swerved, tires hissing. One impatient horn cut through the morning and made the boy jerk sideways, shoulders hunching as though bracing for a blow. Janelle's chest tightened. She eased onto the shoulder 20 feet ahead, angled the cruiser slightly to give him a barrier from traffic. Gravel pinged softly under her tires as she rolled to a stop. For a second, she just watched him. Tiny against a roar of engines, dark glasses tilted toward the sound of her car. His left hand clamped a backpack to his chest, so hard his knuckles were pale. His right hand gripped the cane, frozen mid-swing. He didn't move closer, just stood there, waiting, unsure. Janelle felt the way training met instinct. Slow approach, low voice, no sudden moves. She turned off the engine but left the lights on for visibility, then stepped out. The smell of damp pavement and diesel hit her. Trucks barreled past, throwing grit and wind. She took 3 careful steps toward him, palms open, voice steady but warm. "Hey there, buddy. I'm Officer Ramirez. You're safe. Okay? You hear me?" The boy's chin shifted slightly toward her voice, but he didn't answer. His breath came quick and shallow. She took another step, mindful of distance, enough to be reassuring, not enough to crowd him. "You're on a busy road. Let's get you somewhere safe, huh?" His mouth opened, but only a small sound came out, more exhale than word. Finally, quiet. "I'm fine." It was almost a whisper, the brittle kind kids use when they're terrified but trying not to show it. "Okay," she said gently, "but the cars aren't fine. They're too close." She nodded toward the semi idling behind him. That driver was worried. So was I. A long pause. Then uncertainly, "Who's there? Just you?" "Just me for now," she answered. "Another officer's on the way, but I'm here first. Can I come closer?" He gave a small nod. She took it slow, closing the space until she was a few feet away. Up close, she could see he was thin, jacket sleeves short at the wrist, sneakers soaked from wet grass. The cane trembled in his hand. "Can I help you off the shoulder?" she asked. Another tiny nod. She extended her arm but didn't touch until she felt the faintest brush of his hand finding hers. His fingers were icy. She guided him back a few careful steps, shielding him with her body and the cruiser's fender from the stream of vehicles. Once they reached the gravel strip, he let out a breath that sounded older than 11. "What's your name?" she asked quietly. He hesitated. Eli. Hi, Eli. You did great out there. You're safe now. He didn't respond, just tightened his hold on the backpack, as if afraid she might take it. Janelle noticed the worn canvas, the way the straps had been knotted and retied to stay together. Something about the way he cradled it made her throat go dry. She turned slightly, scanning traffic. Deputy Cole Adams's SUV was coming fast in the opposite lane, lights flicking. Relief flickered in her gut. Back up to help control the road and keep things calm. She crouched so her eyes were level with Eli's blank lenses. I'm going to have another officer park behind us. Slow things down. You're okay. No one's going to hurt you. He shifted his weight, listening to the hum of approaching tires. I was going somewhere, he said quietly, almost like an apology. Okay, she said, gentle but firm. We'll figure that out together. Just stay with me for now. For a long moment they stood there in the low morning light. Her boots in the gravel, his small sneakers half-soaked, the highway's roar muted by her presence. Janelle felt the pulse at her throat begin to settle, but the tightness in her chest stayed. Something about the boy's silence, the death grip on that bag, told her this wasn't just a lost kid. Whatever had put him out here alone had weight, and she was about to have to carry some of it too. Eli's chin shifted the slightest bit toward the sounds he couldn't see, the low growl of a truck engine idling behind, the faint rustle of a uniform as Officer Ramirez shifted her boots in the gravel. His face didn't change, but his whole body seemed to take a small, careful breath, as if the air itself needed testing before he let it in. The cane stayed angled across his lap now that he was sitting on the cruiser's bumper, but the hand holding the backpack never loosened. He clutched the straps so tightly the knuckles of his small fingers blanched. Each time a car hissed past on the wet asphalt, he flinched almost imperceptibly, just enough that the canvas of the bag rustled against his jacket. Ramirez noticed the way his head moved, not random, but tiny calibrations, turning toward voices, away from tires, listening for distance and danger the way sighted kids didn't have to. She crouched again, keeping her hands visible though she knew he couldn't see them. You okay sitting here for a second? She asked softly. He nodded, a single, stiff movement. All right, you're doing really good. He didn't answer, but his breathing began to slow, though every few seconds his thumb rubbed the seam of the pack. Quick and nervous. She glanced at it, at the patched corners and dirt ground deep into the fabric. A strap had been mended with uneven stitches, a child's or maybe a desperate adult's quick repair. On one side, an old reflective strip had peeled halfway off, still catching a glint of morning light each time a car passed. It looked less like a school bag and more like something that had been with him a long time, too important to replace. Behind them, Deputy Adams parked his SUV at an angle and stepped out carefully, not slamming the door. Ramirez didn't look up. She just raised one hand low where Eli might sense it. Adams read the signal and stayed back by the hood, letting the quiet settle. The road noise dulled a little with 2 patrol cars protecting the shoulder, but not enough to erase the danger that had been there minutes before. Eli's shoulders twitched once at the rumble of an 18-wheeler downshifting far away. Ramirez tried again, voice low and even. What's in the backpack, bud? Anything heavy? Just making sure it's not hurting your shoulders. He stiffened at once, arms tightening. It's mine, he said, small and sharp, the first real spark of emotion in his voice. She raised a hand quickly, calming. Of course. I'm not taking it. Just worried it's heavy. He didn't answer. The protective way he hunched around the bag made her throat ache. Whatever was inside wasn't just belongings. It was safety, maybe the only safety he had. Okay, she said, gentle, letting it go. You keep it. No one's touching it. The boy swallowed audibly. His lips moved, maybe forming words he didn't say. Then, so quiet she almost missed it. I can't lose it. All right, she murmured, more to reassure than to question. You won't. A long silence followed, broken only by the intermittent whoosh of cars and the faint click of Adams's radio as he coordinated traffic. Eli's head tilted slightly, listening to everything at once. He had the tense stillness of someone who expected the world to lurch without warning. Ramirez found herself slowing her own movements, careful not to make noise that might startle him. You're safe here, she said after a while. "Nobody's gonna hurt you. We're just worried because that road's busy." He didn't speak, but one hand shifted, the fingers flexing once against the bag, not letting go, but a subtle lessening, a fraction less white at the knuckles. It was enough for her to keep going. "You got family we can call?" she tried. His head turned sharply toward the road again, and he shook it once, a tiny motion. Then, after a pause, "No one." He cleared his throat. "I just need to go somewhere." "Somewhere safe?" she asked. Another long pause. Then he nodded. Ramirez caught Adams's eyes over the roof of the car. His brows lifted, question, and worry. She gave the smallest shake of her head. "Not yet. Not safe to push." She looked back to Eli, keeping her voice level, giving him space, but also something steady to hold on to. "You've done a brave thing already," she said. "Hard thing, walking alone like that." His chin dropped, but he didn't deny it. She could see a tremor begin at his elbow and move up until the backpack rustled faintly, fear catching up now that he'd stopped moving. "You're not alone anymore," she added. He bit his lower lip, a quick, uncertain bite, then lifted his face fractionally toward her voice. Behind the dark glasses, she felt him weighing whether to trust. His throat moved as if he'd speak again, but nothing came. Instead, he just kept the bag close, small shoulders squared against a world that had not been gentle. And though she didn't yet know what he carried or what he'd fled, Ramirez understood one thing with absolute clarity. Whatever this boy was holding on to, paper, clothes, memories, maybe hope itself, was a reason he'd survived long enough for her to find him. The first sign of trouble came as sound more felt than heard, the quick, hard change in air pressure when a vehicle doesn't give enough space. Eli's head turned sharply, instinct reacting faster than thought. The white cane jerked up off the gravel and then swung back down just in time to keep his balance as a car shot past, too close, tires clipping the edge of the shoulder. The gust of wind slapped his jacket flat against his chest, and a spray of grit and tiny stones peppered his shoes. He flinched but didn't step back. Instead, he gripped the backpack harder, as if it could anchor him where his feet suddenly doubted the ground. Officer Ramirez felt her pulse spike. She raised one arm high, palm out, motioning furiously to the oncoming lane while shifting her body closer to the boy. "Watch your lane," she shouted, voice edge of steel. The driver, a man with one hand wrapped around a coffee cup and the other tight on the wheel, didn't slow. His face twisted, mouth opening wide to hurl something angry and wordless through his open window before the car was gone again, taillights flashing red for a second like a dare. Adams behind them, swore under his breath and stepped into lane with his flashlight raised, forcing the next line of cars to swing wide. The radio clipped to his shoulder, snapped to life as he called for a traffic unit to start a slow down farther back. Ramirez's jaw clenched. Even with two patrol vehicles angled in lights, strobing red-blue across the wet road, drivers were still flying by half awake, impatient, blind in their own way. She crouched quickly beside Eli again. "You all right?" she asked, soft in the roar around them. He nodded but didn't speak. His chin was tipped down toward the backpack, forehead almost touching the dirty canvas. She could see the grit on his sneakers now, tiny white flecks against the dark fabric. His free hand trembled once, then went still. "You're safe," she said again, meaning it harder this time. "We've got you covered." He turned his face toward the sound of her voice and swallowed. "They're mad." "Not at you," she assured, shaking her head even though he couldn't see it. "People get mad when they're scared or late. Doesn't mean they can touch you." His mouth pressed into a thin line. She wanted to ask where he'd come from, how long he'd been out here, but right now her job was simpler. Keep him safe while the road woke up to what was happening. She could feel how close danger still sat. Every horn, every spray of pebbles a reminder how fragile their little pocket of safety was. Adams approached slowly, stopping short enough not to crowd. "I've got county on the way to divert," he said over the wind, "but it's 5 minutes at best." Ramirez gave a short nod and turned her shoulder to shield Eli a little more. Another car came too fast, slowed late, and sent up another hiss of water and dust. She reached out a steadying hand, close enough for him to feel without surprise. "We're making a bubble, okay?" You're inside it. Eli's small shoulders twitched once, the kind of shiver that isn't cold but something deeper. He pulled the backpack closer, arms folded tight around it until his hands were buried. She noticed how he bent forward slightly, head ducked the way people do when expecting impact. She hated that reflex in children, a flinch that shouldn't be learned so young. You did the right thing by keeping on the shoulder, she said, filling the air with calm even though her heart still raced. You stayed where drivers could see you. He whispered something she almost missed. Didn't know if anyone would stop. She waited a second, let the quiet stretch before answering. Someone did. Then, softer still, I did. For the first time, his grip eased a fraction, and he let the cane rest flat across his knees. Not trust yet, but the barest crack in the armor. Behind them, Adams's radio crackled with confirmation that extra units were setting up to slow traffic. The hiss and roar of cars dulled slightly, replaced by the rising sound of control. Cones dropping, engines downshifting, hazard lights blinking farther back. Ramirez felt her shoulders drop a millimeter. Not safe yet, but safer. She shifted her stance, letting her utility belt clink softly to warn him she was still there. In a minute, we'll move you into my car, she said, warm and quiet. How's that sound? He didn't answer right away. Then, so softly she nearly missed it. Okay. That was enough. She glanced at Adams, got the faintest nod. Road secure enough for a careful walk. She stood and held out her hand but didn't press. After a long pause, a small, cold palm slid into hers, so tentative she had to steady her own breath. Together they took the first step away from the shoulder, and Ramirez realized her knees were shaking harder than his. She'd seen dangerous things in uniform, but nothing quite like a blind boy standing alone in the rush of morning traffic, trusting only sound and instinct to stay alive. Every angry horn, every spray of gravel had felt like fate flipping a coin. And today, for reasons she didn't yet know, the coin had landed on Mercy. The cruiser's lights threw slow red and blue pulses across the damp blacktop as Officer Janelle Ramirez pushed the door open and stepped out into the hiss of tires and morning wind. She moved the way training had taught her, slow, grounded, each boot finding quiet purchase on gravel, so the sound reached the boy before she did. Her heart was loud in her own ears, but her voice had to be steady. The smallest wrong note could send him sideways into danger. Hey there, buddy, she called, warm but controlled, projecting just enough to rise over the rush of passing cars without sounding like a shout. It's okay. You're safe. The boy reacted at once. The tip of his cane jerked. His head turned sharply toward her, but he didn't bolt. She noted that small mercy and took another measured step, stopping well short of touching distance. His slight frame seemed to shrink as a pickup roared past, a curtain of cold air slapping his jacket. I'm Officer Ramirez, she said. She used her name deliberately, not just her title. Something for him to hold on to, a voice anchored to a person. I'm right here in front of you. You're off the lane, but cars are close. Let's keep you safe, okay? He didn't speak. His chin trembled once, then lifted a fraction, the way someone blind sometimes turns the sound. She watched the white-knuckled grip on his backpack and felt a protective ache swell deep in her chest. She moved one slow step closer and lowered herself to a crouch so he wouldn't feel loomed over. The gravel crunched faintly under her boots, and she froze to let him absorb the noise. I'm going to stay right here, she said softly. I won't touch you unless you want help. You're not alone anymore. Finally, a voice small and uneven, Don't come fast. Not fast, she promised, relieved to hear anything at all. Just me. You're safe. He angled his head, listening past her, toward the endless passing of tires. Each one made him flinch almost invisibly. The sound of danger had been his whole map until now. Can we step back from the edge? She asked after a beat. Just a few feet, nice and slow. He hesitated. One foot shifted half an inch and stopped. It's loud. I know. She glanced behind. Deputy Adams was still parked back, hazard lights cutting a protective wedge. She raised a hand to him. Wait, then refocused on the boy. You've done amazing out here. But let me help you back just a little. I'll tell you each step. He swallowed audibly, and she realized how young he really was. Maybe 11, maybe younger, trying so hard to sound calm. Okay, he whispered. Good job, she said, voice low and sure. She extended her hand slowly into the space between them, not touching, just letting him sense presence. If you want, reach for my hand, or my arm, whatever's easier. It took long seconds. Then his cold fingers brushed her palm and clamped down fast, small but fierce. She closed her hand gently but firmly around his, just enough to say she was real, not enough to trap. Step toward my voice, she guided. That's it, another little one. She kept a running, quiet commentary, the sort of verbal map a sighted child might not need, but he did. You'll feel gravel now, good. Almost there. They moved in small increments until the echo of traffic shifted, a subtle sign they found safer ground. She felt his muscles release a breath before he did. Better? She asked. He nodded once, still clutching her hand. His other arm stayed welded around the backpack. You're doing great, she said. Really brave. She waited, giving him the quiet to recalibrate. After a while, he spoke, barely above the hum of idling engines. I didn't think anybody would stop. She blinked against the sting behind her eyes. Well, somebody did. I did. Another long silence. Then he let go of her hand, but only so he could clutch the bag tighter. His chin tipped down toward it like instinct. All right, she said gently, shifting to stand but keeping her voice level. I'm going to stay right next to you. We'll get you somewhere warm and safe. She glanced over her shoulder. Adams had stepped into the lane, waving down another impatient car, buying them a margin of safety. The blue-red strobes made long, wet streaks across the black road. Ramirez turned back to the boy, who seemed a little less like a frozen shadow now and a little more like a person returning from somewhere dangerous and alone. She kept her voice a thread between them, calm, deliberate, never rushing. Every inch of movement away from that edge was a small victory, built out of steady words and a promise she was determined to keep. The silence between them stretched thin, filled only by the hiss of passing tires and the rhythmic click of Deputy Adams's flashlight against his palm as he stood watch further back. Officer Ramirez stayed crouched at eye level, careful not to push, letting the boy's breathing even out at its own pace. His small shoulders rose and fell quickly, almost too quickly, as though every nerve was still waiting for the next roar of an engine to shove him sideways. She could see the slight tremor in his hand where it gripped the backpack strap, a tremor he seemed determined not to let her notice. She tried again, voice even softer this time, steady like a guide rope. I'd like to know your name, if you want to tell me. That way I can talk to you, not just at you. For a moment, he didn't move, didn't breathe. Then his lips parted, and the words came out barely audible, a scrape of sound carried off almost instantly by the road noise. Eli. Ramirez leaned in slightly, enough to catch it. Eli. That's a strong name. She let it hang there, respectful, waiting for him to decide if he wanted to give more. He seemed to weigh something inside himself before he added, Eli Carter. The syllables were careful, almost formal, as if reciting something he'd practiced or clung to. All right, Eli Carter, Ramirez said gently, making sure to repeat it, to show she'd heard him clearly. How old are you? 11. The number fell from him as though it were an afterthought, but his hands betrayed him. The cane rattled softly against his knee from the tremor. 11, she echoed, nodding. You've been very brave out here. He ducked his head slightly, as if embarrassed by the word. His thumb rubbed hard at the edge of the backpack zipper. Over and over, the repetitive motion of someone trying to hold steady. When he finally spoke again, his voice was steadier but quieter, meant almost for himself. I'm just going somewhere safe. The words caught Ramirez off guard. Not the content, but the tone. Not defiance, not explanation, but kind of fragile insistence, as though that simple sentence was the only thing keeping him upright. She resisted the urge to ask where or why, choosing instead to ground him in the moment. That's good, Eli. Wanting to be safe makes sense. You deserve that. She glanced back. Adam shifted his stance but kept silent, reading the air. No one moved too fast. No one intruded. It was Eli's space, Eli's timing. Ramirez returned her gaze to the boy. "Can you tell me how you ended up here on the road?" she asked carefully. His head shook once, almost imperceptibly. Then he whispered, "Just had to leave." His fingers tightened on the backpack, as though the words themselves threatened to take it from him. "Okay," she said, acknowledging without pressing. "Leaving sometimes means you're very strong." His breathing faltered again, and she thought for a second he might cry, but he clenched his jaw tight enough that the muscle stood out faintly. No tears came. He wasn't going to let himself crack, not in front of strangers. "You're not in trouble," Ramirez added. "You're not doing anything wrong. Walking out here alone, though, that's dangerous. Cars can always see you." "I know." His voice was sharper this time, but only because it carried the weight of someone who had already calculated risk and still chosen to take it. "I had to." That was all he gave her, and it was enough for now. Ramirez let the silence sit, filling it with her steady presence rather than questions. She saw how the words cost him, how hard it was for him to speak at all. Yet beneath the shaking hands and thin jacket, there was a current of determination she recognized. The same stubbornness she'd seen in people twice his age who had already been asked to survive too much. "Eli Carter, 11 years old," she repeated softly, as if anchoring him to ground by saying it out loud. "Heading somewhere safe." He nodded once, chin brushing the top of the pack he cradled. His breath slowed just enough for her to see his ribs expand beneath the worn jacket. In that moment, surrounded by impatient horns, the shimmer of wet asphalt, and the blur of strangers rushing to their own mornings, Janelle Ramirez understood one thing beyond the badge and beyond procedure. The boy's voice, shaking and quiet as it was, had just handed her his truth, and now it was her job to guard it. The way he guarded the bag pressed his chest like it was life itself. Ramirez shifted her weight to one knee so she could speak to Eli without towering over him. The road was quieter now. Deputy Adams had managed to slow the flow of cars, and the few that passed gave a respectful distance. That gave her space to look more carefully, to take in what she had been too focused on protecting to really see. The details emerged slowly, small and ordinary at first glance, but heavy when added together. Eli's sleeve had slid back as he adjusted his hold on the backpack. She caught sight of faint yellow-brown marks circling the thin wrist. Not the fresh, angry red of an accident, but older bruises fading at the edges. They looked like something that had once been grabbed too hard and left to heal in silence. She felt the flicker of anger in her chest and forced her expression to stay neutral. No sudden questions. He didn't need interrogation. He needed safety. Her eyes moved the backpack. He still clutched, as if letting go would mean losing everything. The strap nearest his shoulder was a mess of quick repairs. Knots tied and retied, frayed nylon stitched unevenly with what looked like kitchen thread. Another strap's padding had torn away long ago, leaving raw webbing that cut against the curve of his neck. Someone who had the means would have replaced it. Someone who didn't, or who didn't care, would have told him to make do. She glanced down at his sneakers. They were once white, but now mostly gray and brown, soaked through the toes where the mist and damp pavement had claimed them. When he moved his feet, she saw how the fabric pulled awkwardly, too short for his growing toes. One sole flapped slightly at the front, held together by determination alone. She pictured each step he had taken down this unforgiving road in shoes that pinched and failed, and the quiet stubbornness it must have taken to keep going. Ramirez kept her voice calm, but softer than before, hoping to thread reassurance into the space between them. "Looks like you walked a long way, Eli." He didn't answer, only pressed his knees closer together, the backpack wedged between them like a shield. His chin dipped further, hiding most of his face behind the collar of his jacket. She tried another approach, careful not to let curiosity sound like interrogation. "Those shoes have done some work today." That earned a tiny shift, almost like a shrug, though he didn't raise his head. "They're fine," he murmured. She didn't challenge him. "You're tough," she said instead, a quiet acknowledgement without praise so big it would make him retreat. She noticed the bruises again, the small hands that tried to hide them by pulling the sleeves down. No child should have to be strategic about hiding marks. Ramirez's own chest felt tight with the weight of what she was seeing. Years of responding to homes where love turned dangerous had taught her to read these small cues: the threadbare bag, the bruised wrist, the shoes that no one replaced. They told a story even if he couldn't or wouldn't yet. She tried a different tack, focusing on the present rather than the past. Your backpack's been with you a long time, huh? That question seemed to land somewhere he could handle. His hand smoothed the canvas unconsciously. Yeah, it's important. Another small nod. I won't touch it, she promised. Just wanted to say it looks strong, like it's done a lot of miles with you. A tiny exhale left him, not trust, but the softest easing of the coil inside him. For the first time, he didn't flinch when a car swept by behind the cruisers. Adams moved closer, boots crunching deliberately so Eli could hear before feel. We're making it safe back there, he said quietly, careful not to overwhelm. County's got a slow roll coming. Road will be quieter soon. Ramirez gave the faintest nod, but kept her eyes on Eli. You hear that? Safer now. He shifted the cane across his lap and adjusted his grip on the bag, but still didn't let go. His voice was almost lost to the wind when he said, Had to bring it. I get that, Ramirez said simply. No probing, just validation. They stayed there a while longer, the three of them in a small circle of calm carved out a dangerous morning. She could feel how fragile everything was, his balance, his trust, the tiny bridge forming between silence and safety. The bruises and frayed straps weren't just signs of a hard life. They were evidence of how fiercely he protected himself long enough to end up here alive. She would not be the one to break that fragile line of survival. Ramirez straightened slowly, careful to keep her tone even. When you're ready, we'll head to my car. It's warm, and I've got a blanket if you're cold. No answer at first. Then a faint nod, quick and small, but nod all the same. She glanced at Adams and saw understanding there. No rushing, no sudden flood of questions. They would move at his pace. The row behind them was beginning to quiet as more units arrived to slow the flow of vehicles. For now, there was enough stillness for Eli to breathe and for Ramirez to let the image settle in her mind. A boy who had walked into danger with shoes that didn't fit, a body marked by hands too rough, and a single bag he believed could keep him safe. The low rumble of another engine joined the muted chorus of passing cars, different enough that Ramirez felt it before she saw it. She glanced over her shoulder and saw the familiar dark SUV easing onto the shoulder 100 feet back. Its light bar stayed dark. Only the amber hazards blinked slow, patient warnings at approaching traffic. Cole Adams knew how to show up without spooking a kid already strung tight. Ramirez lifted one hand from where it rested on her knee and gave a quick, subtle motion. Palm down, slow approach. Adams answered with a short dip of headlights before rolling forward until his bumper was set behind the cruiser, angled just enough to create another layer of protection without boxing them in. The additional weight of the second vehicle instantly changed the air. Passing drivers began sliding a little farther left, curiosity slowing them, respect or at least caution flickering across windshields. Adams stepped out quietly. The door shut with a muted thud instead of the usual slam. He was tall and broad, but he kept his shoulders relaxed, hands visible and empty. His boots crunched on the gravel in a deliberate rhythm, slow enough for the boy to register the sound, not sudden enough to trigger flight. Ramirez met his eyes across the distance and flicked her fingers once, a signal to hold back, to let her keep the fragile connection she'd started. Eli, head still bowed toward his backpack, turned slightly at the sound. The cane on his lap tapped once against the bumper, a tiny sonar pulse. Ramirez leaned in just enough to keep her voice's anchor. That's just another officer, Eli. His name's Cole. He's here to help keep cars away. Nobody's going to bother you. No answer, but the boy didn't flinch. His shoulders stayed taut, but didn't curl tighter. Adams stopped a few paces away, reading the invisible boundary Ramirez had set. He gave a small wave meant only for her and kept his voice low. Traffic's thick back there. I'll call county for a slowdown. Then to Eli, the same easy tone, nothing loud or official. Hey, kiddo, I'm Cole. Just making sure nobody gets too close. Eli's fingers flexed once against the backpack strap, but he didn't lift his head. That was enough of a cue for Adams, who nodded silently and stepped sideways toward the road instead of forward. He turned his back partly to the boy, making himself a moving wall against traffic. A second later, his radio hissed alive as he called in a request for assistance and set up a rolling block to calm the morning rush. Ramirez watched Eli's small hand go back to tracing the edge of the zipper. Over and over, she let the quiet linger, letting him know nothing had changed with the new arrival. "See? Just more safety for you," she said softly. A long pause, then a tiny exhale from behind the jacket collar. He was listening. That was something. The world around them shifted as the second patrol presence took hold. Drivers were braking sooner, giving the shoulder wider berth. Somewhere down the highway, a larger vehicle must have slowed traffic because the constant hiss of tires thinned and grew more distant. The stretch of road around them felt less like a gauntlet and more like a protected island. Adam circled back briefly, keeping his body language open and easy. He stopped far enough that Eli wouldn't feel hemmed in. "Another unit's on its way," he murmured to Ramirez. "I can drop cones when they get here." She nodded, eyes never leaving the boy. Adams added, "Quieter still, you good?" She gave the faintest tilt of her head. Not yet, but close. Then she tried again with Eli, now that the chaos behind them had softened. "Hey, Eli," she said gently. "We're safer now. Cars have to slow because of Cole back there. You did great staying put." The boy didn't speak, but she saw his grip shift slightly on the backpack strap. Not letting go, but not white-knuckled either. A breath that wasn't quite a sigh escaped him. Adams, reading the room, retreated a few steps and resumed his sentry roll at the edge of the lane, scanning the road with a practice calm that said everything's under control. With the danger pushed further away for the moment, Ramirez felt the tight coil in her chest loosen a fraction. They had space to breathe, to think beyond immediate survival. She could almost feel the shift in the boy, too. Still fragile, still guarded, but no longer pinned to the edge of flight. She adjusted her stance to be less imposing, crouching again so her presence remained steady but not overbearing. "That friend of mine back there? He's helping me keep you safe. That's all we're here for." The boy's head lifted half an inch, enough to let her know he'd heard and understood. Even if trust wasn't coming yet, she would take that small victory in her line of work. Safety was built one quiet, deliberate moment at a time. And right now, with backup silently reinforcing the thin shield around them, the first true piece of safety had arrived. Ramirez had seen people cling to things before: a stuffed animal, a phone, a duffel with everything they owned jammed inside. But the way Eli held that backpack was different. His arms didn't simply rest across it. They wrapped it, cinched tight until his shoulders rounded forward, and his whole small frame seemed built around keeping it safe. Even as the road quieted under the slow-moving county vehicles now controlling traffic, his grip hadn't loosened. His chin hovered just above the canvas, and every time a car passed, he instinctively curled a little tighter as if noise alone might rip it away. She crouched again to his level, careful to let her boots scuff the gravel so he could orient on her approach. "Eli," she said quietly, "you okay right now?" He nodded but didn't raise his head. The movement was slight, almost imperceptible, like a signal more to himself than to her. She tried again, patient. "Your backpack looks heavy. Want me to hold it while you stretch your arms?" That brought an instant, sharp response. His entire body went rigid. His head snapped up just enough for her to see the line of his jaw under the too big collar. "No." The word was quiet but firm, startling in its finality. Ramirez lifted her hand slowly, palms out. "Okay, not gonna touch it. Promise." His breathing stayed uneven for a few beats before easing back to the shallow rhythm he'd kept since she found him. He rubbed his thumb along the edge of the zipper, a nervous but deliberate motion. She noticed how careful it was, like he was checking for any sign it might have opened. "What's inside?" she asked gently after a long pause, more invitation than demand. He shook his head once. "Can't lose this." It was whispered so softly she almost missed it under the wind. Her throat tightened. She recognized that tone, the fierce, small voice of a child who's learned that one thing stand between him and something worse. "You won't," she said. "I wouldn't let that happen." He seemed to weigh that, then gave no sign he believed her, but also no pushback. Just went still again, hugging the pack. Ramirez didn't push further. Kids in crisis built their own rules for survival. Tear those down too quickly, and everything could collapse. She kept her words calm, casual. Looks like it's been with you a long time. Yeah, barely audible, but it was the first non-defensive sound he made since she asked about it. It's gotten you far, she added. That's smart. He swallowed and pulled the bag even closer, but his shoulders dropped a fraction, less combat ready now that she'd stopped prying. The mistrust in his posture softened just enough to breathe around. Deputy Adams glanced back from the road, eyebrows raised. Ramirez gave a subtle shake of her head and mouthed, "Let it be." He nodded and went back to watching traffic. Ramirez shifted, so she was half seated on the cruiser bumper beside Eli, but not touching. The silence felt delicate, but no longer brittle. "You hungry, Eli?" "Thirsty." He hesitated, then shook his head. She didn't believe it. She'd bet he hadn't eaten since yesterday, but she let it go for now, one bridge at a time. "You did the right thing hanging on to whatever's in there," she said after a while, voice gentle but firm. "You're smart to protect what matters." Another small nod. This time he adjusted the strap, like a soldier checking gear, before moving again. He might not trust her yet, but he understood she wasn't going to steal what little he had left. She glanced toward the second unit, arriving to fully block the lane, and felt the tension in her own spine ease. The immediate danger had passed. Now came the slower work, unraveling enough fear for this boy to let the world help him. When she looked back, he'd shifted slightly so the pack was resting against his stomach rather than up under his chin. His hands were still locked on the straps, but his fingers weren't white anymore. That tiny easing was enough to make her swallow hard against a sudden knot in her throat. "We're going to get you somewhere safe," she said, repeating his own words back to him like a promise. "And you can keep that bag with you the whole time. No one's taking it." He didn't respond aloud, but for the first time his face tilted slightly toward her voice rather than away. It was small, fragile, but it was trust beginning to flicker, a tiny shift earned not by force, but by respecting the invisible line drawn around a boy and his bag. The stillness around the boy and the two cruisers was thin, fragile, but behind it a quiet storm of voices and codes began to stir. Inside her car, the radio muttered in clipped bursts, dispatchers threading concern into their usually neutral tone. Ramirez kept one ear tuned while staying anchored beside Eli. She didn't want the boy to hear the full weight of machinery moving around him, but she needed to know what was coming. A double click, then the calm voice of Karen, the dispatcher who'd first taken call. "Unit 27 confirmed child's name? We're running NCIC for missing juveniles." Ramirez leaned slightly toward her shoulder mic, keeping her voice level so Eli wouldn't sense a shift. "Copy. Name is Eli Carter, approximately 11 years old." She glanced at him to be sure using his name didn't alarm him. He didn't flinch, just hugged the backpack closer. "Received," Karen answered after a pause. In the background, faint typing, muted voices, another dispatcher feeding details into the system. Then, nothing immediate under that name statewide. Expanding radius. Ramirez's gut sank. Kids didn't end up miles down a highway without someone noticing, but sometimes no one filed the paperwork. Sometimes the ones who should have didn't want. Another voice broke in, softer, pitched lower like someone leaning away from a mic. "Notify CPS to monitor," a colleague suggested behind Karen's feed. The word wasn't meant for broadcast, but enough bled to the channel for Ramirez to catch it. She saw Adams's eyes flick up. He'd caught it too. Neither of them looked at Eli. Karen's voice returned, official again. 27. Can you confirm any identifiers? Clothing. Ramirez glanced over the boy with careful eyes, cataloging without sounding like she was inspecting. Dark jacket, gray hoodie underneath, jeans, white sneakers heavily worn, carrying a black canvas backpack with reflective strip. Visual impairment confirmed. Copy. More typing, faint. Still no match. Eli's head tilted minutely, catching the sound of the radio. His lips pressed together. Ramirez lowered the volume knob a notch and turned slightly toward him. "They're just making sure you're safe," she said gently. "That's all the talking." He didn't answer, but his breathing hitched, one quick shallow catch before settling again. She hated how attuned he was a threat. Even a conversation about him through static was enough to spark defense. Adams approached, stopping short, his voice pitched low enough to keep it from carrying. CPS on standby? Ramirez nodded slightly. They're opening a line just in case. She kept her gaze on Eli, but we're not handing him over anyone blind. Not until we know. Adams grunted soft agreement and stepped back again, taking up his quiet guard. Another crackle from Karen. Unit 27, still negative on Carter, Eli, expanding to surrounding states. Ramirez pressed a mic and said evenly, "Understood. Keep me posted." Then she turned the knob down another quarter, so the next burst of static wouldn't reach small ears. The boy didn't ask questions, but his fingers needed the edge of the backpack strap, anxious, restless. She let breath out slow, then said to him quietly, "Sometimes the people on the radio just look for families. Doesn't mean trouble. Just making sure no one's lost you." "I'm not lost," he said suddenly, a soft but certain correction. Ramirez's heart squeezed. "I know." She said it once, no argument. "You knew where you were going." That seemed to calm him a hair. His grip stayed, but the restless kneading stopped. Behind them, another cruiser rolled up to seal off Mortar Lane. Adams went to confer, his wide frame shielding the child from any new, curious eyes. Ramirez stayed put, a steady human presence between the boy and the world trying to categorize him. The radio buzzed again, but she didn't turn it up. She'd hear enough without letting the words reach him. She could imagine Karen's screens, databases flipping from local alerts to national, waiting for some match to ping. She could picture the CPS intake clerk sipping coffee while half listening, preparing forms just in case. She knew how fast a machine could move once it decided a child was unclaimed. But sitting there next to this boy, clutching his single lifeline, Ramirez felt protective in a way that went beyond protocol. She wasn't going to let the first net that caught him be cold paperwork and strangers. "Not yet. You did good telling me your name," she told him, keeping the moment human amid the static and codes. "That helps us keep you safe." He didn't respond, but his chin lifted slightly, and she took that as a fragile acceptance. In the near distance, the second unit's cones began clicking onto asphalt. Traffic slowed to a crawl, and the roads roared dull to a manageable hum. The radio whispered faint updates, but Ramirez let them fade to background noise. Right now, what mattered wasn't the system mobilizing. It was a boy sitting in wet sneakers, trying to believe that for once the adults around him might not take something away. The rain had slowed to a faint mist, just enough to beat on the cruiser's hood and dampen the air. Ramirez took a quiet step closer and lowered herself again until she was nearly kneeling, the damp seeping through her uniform pants as gravel pressed against her knee. She kept her movements unhurried and deliberate. Sudden gestures made children like Eli fold back into themselves. The boy sat hunched on the bumper where she guided him earlier, the cane across his lap, the backpack still locked to his chest. He'd gone still in that way kids do when their nerves are frayed and they're trying to disappear. She leaned in just enough that her voice would meet him where he was. "Hey, Eli." Her tone was gentle but clear, a voice built for calm rather than command. "Can I ask you something?" His chin shifted a fraction, not a nod but a signal he was listening. "I want to help you get somewhere safe," she continued, letting the words come slow. "But I need to know where you were heading. Where were you trying to go?" He didn't answer. His fingers went back to the backpack zipper, rubbing the seam in tiny quick strokes. She waited, resisting the urge to fill the silence. Years on the job had taught her how patience could work better than pressure. When he finally spoke, the words were faint and shaky. "To my mom." Ramirez's breath caught before she could stop it. She softened her voice even more. "Your mom." "Okay." She let the acknowledgement settle between them, a small bridge built from his first act of trust. "Is that where she lives now?" He flinched, almost imperceptibly, then shook his head once. His glasses slipped a little down the bridge of his nose, but he didn't adjust them. "She's not there." Ramirez stayed still, every instinct telling her not to push too fast. "But you were trying to find her?" Another tiny shake of the head. He swallowed hard and then whispered, "She's gone." The simplicity of it, spoken without ceremony, was like a cold blade. Ramirez closed her eyes briefly, then opened them and kept her voice warm, steady. "I'm sorry, Eli." He didn't respond, only pressed his face briefly against the backpack's edge as if to hide. She let him have that shield. After a moment, she tried again, careful. "If she's gone, is there someone else where you were going? Someone safe?" His head tilted slightly, listening. Then, so softly she almost missed it, "I was just going." The answer wasn't defiant. It was hollow, a survival instinct stripped of destination. She felt a deep ache in her chest, a child willing to walk into danger, because standing still it felt worse. "You did something brave," she said quietly. "You tried to keep yourself safe." She hesitated and then added, "I want to help with that. You don't have to keep walking alone." He drew a shaky breath but didn't lift his face. One small hand clutched at the strap of the backpack until his nails pressed into the frayed fabric. Ramirez glanced down and saw the faint tremor start up again in his arm. She wanted to reach out, but she kept her hands where he could track them. No surprises, no threats. "Can you tell me if there's anywhere you've thought about going?" she asked. "A place you know?" He hesitated long enough that she thought he might stay silent. Then, "She wrote, but I can't." His voice broke and trailed off. "She wrote?" Ramirez asked softly. A nod, almost imperceptible. "In the bag." Another faint nod. "That's good," she said, giving quiet approval but not touching the topic too hard. "We'll look at that together, if you want. No rush." His breathing steadied a little, though his chin stayed low. She sensed how much each word cost him, how carefully he was navigating fear and hope at once. Behind them, Adam shifted but stayed silent, reading the room and giving space. The road, now quiet under controlled slow roll, felt like a thin but real barrier between them and whatever Eli had fled. Ramirez kept her voice where it had been, not sugary, not pitying, just patient. "You did a smart thing leaving if it wasn't safe," she said. "And you found help. That's what matters." He didn't respond, but his head tipped slightly toward her voice, a sign he was still with her. After a long pause, she tried to give him something simple, something small he could hold. "You're not alone anymore, Eli." A tremor ran through his shoulders, then faded. He didn't say thank you. He didn't have to. The fact that he stayed seated, stayed present, was its own kind of answer. Ramirez let the silence return and didn't rush it. She knew that in these thin, careful moments trust could either grow or shatter. The boy had told her the first piece of his truth. He'd been walking to a mother who could no longer be there. It was enough for now. She could build the rest from that single fragile word, Mom, and the quiet determination in the child still clinging to a pack that seemed to hold everything left of her. When immediate danger of the highway had eased and traffic was fully under control, Ramirez finally allowed herself to think a few steps ahead. The boy couldn't stay sitting on a bumper forever. Protocol required that she get some kind of residence, at least to check whether anyone was looking for him. She kept her body low and her voice quiet, the same even, careful cadence she'd been using since the first moment she saw him. "Eli," she said softly, "I know you said you were going somewhere safe. Can you tell me where you came from before you got to the road?" For a long time, he didn't answer. His fingers went back to the familiar pattern along the backpack zipper, tiny nervous circles over worn fabric. She waited. He didn't look up when he finally whispered, "Home." "That's good," she said gently, though something about the word made her stomach twist. "Can you tell me the street? Just so we know where to start." He was silent so long she thought he wouldn't speak again. Then he mumbled an address, hesitant and halting, as if saying it might conjure something bad. Ramirez repeated it back softly to be sure she had it right. He gave one small nod, then curled back around the pack. She stepped a few feet away, giving him space, and keyed her mic dispatch, copy and address check. She gave a location in measured tones. Karen's voice came back after a beat. Received, confirming occupant details. Ramirez kept her eyes on Eli while she waited, careful not to let her posture look like surveillance. He was sitting very still, but the quiet wasn't peace. It was the kind of stillness that comes when a kid is holding himself together. The moment her radio cracked again, his shoulders twitched. Karen's voice. Address comes back to Carter, Jonathan. Father. No active warrants. Power and utilities on. No missing child report filed. Ramirez's gut sank. A father alive and well, but no call placed. She glanced at Adams. He grimaced faintly, the same grim understanding passing between them. She turned her radio down before the next click. Then she moved back into the boy's space, slow enough for him to feel her presence. Eli, she said quietly, I looked up the house you told me about. That's where your dad lives. He didn't answer at first. Then a small, almost imperceptible nod. Okay, she said, careful, gentle. That's where you've been staying? His head shook once, hard enough that it made his glasses slip again. Can't go back there. The words came fast, stripped of hesitation, and the way he said them made Ramirez's chest tighten. She stayed still, letting him know he was safe to say more if he wanted. Okay, she echoed, a quiet affirmation. You don't have to go back if it's not safe. He flinched slightly, as though the permission startled him. His mouth worked like he might say something else, but nothing came. Just a quiet, fierce shake of the head. Ramirez nodded slowly. Thank you for telling me. She kept her voice steady and low. I believe you. She glanced back at Adams, who was already pulling his phone, likely pinging CPS contact directly. They would start the process of emergency protective custody. It wasn't simple, but it was possible when a child clearly couldn't be returned home. Ramirez stayed rooted beside Eli. The last thing she wanted was for him to feel like information he gave would send him spiraling into some system without warning. She angled back to him. Sometimes grown-ups aren't safe, she said, choosing each word with care. It's okay to tell me if that's true. You're not in trouble for leaving. His chin stayed low, but she caught the almost imperceptible movement of a nod. Her throat went dry. All right, she said softly. That's enough for right now. You're safe with us. She wanted to ask about his mom again, about what had driven him onto the road. But the way he hunched made clear that this was all he could give today. Instead, she sat with him in the quiet, letting the mist and the dull throb of hazard lights fill the space. She could feel how much it cost him just to say he can't go back there. Behind him, Adams finished his call and gave her a slight nod. CPS aware, standby confirmed. Ramirez didn't share that yet. No forms, no agencies, not until she could make sure the next step wouldn't be just another cold hand taking something from him. For now, all she wanted was for this boy to know that someone heard him and believed him. She shifted a little closer, enough for him to sense, not enough to crowd. We'll figure out where safe is, she said quietly. Together, you don't have to go back. He exhaled shakily, the first breath since he'd said the words. It wasn't relief exactly, but something small and raw, the edge of survival easing just enough for another step forward. And in that moment, on the side of a once dangerous road, Ramirez made herself a silent promise. No matter how tangled the paperwork, no matter how long the day became, she was not sending this child back to a house he'd had to run from. The mist had started to lift, leaving the air damp but clearer, and with a quieter road, Ramirez could finally study the boy without fear of some distracted driver hurtling too close. Eli still hadn't let go of the backpack. It was anchored against his ribs as if stitched there, his small arms wrapped in a tangle of sleeves and straps. He sat hunched and watchful, listening for sounds she couldn't hear. His thumb had gone back to tracing the zipper in slow, steady loops, a nervous ritual he didn't seem aware of. Ramirez shifted her weight and let her eyes drift, not to pry but to learn. Up close she could see how battered the pack really was. Frayed edges, dirt rubbed so deep it would never wash out, seemed straining from overstuffing. As he adjusted the bag against his chest, something unexpected caught the light. A narrow strip of leather, darkened with age, poking from one side where the fabric stitching had split. It looked different from the rest of the nylon. Heavier, cracked in spots, the kind of leather you'd find on an old case or strap long before nylon packs were common. It wasn't part of the backpack. It was something tucked inside but too large to fit cleanly. She let her gaze linger, just long enough to memorize the detail, but didn't comment yet. Children who guarded their belongings as fiercely didn't want strangers asking about them. Still, her curiosity sharpened. It wasn't the usual clutter of a kid running away. No clothes spilling out. No toys. Something purposeful was inside. Eli shifted again, and the leather strap slid another inch into view. It had a faint greenish tarnish on a small brass buckle and the polish where something held often. She thought of camera straps, the kind her father used to have, or the shoulder strap of an instrument case. Guitar, maybe violin, something beloved and old. She glanced at his face, but he remained turned slightly away, ears tuned toward the distant road noise. She chose her words with care. "That bag's work hard for you," she said softly. He didn't answer. His thumb kept moving over the zipper. "I see something leather sticking out a little," she added gently. "You want me to help tuck it back in so it doesn't snag?" He tensed instantly, arms cinching the backpack closer. "No." The word shot out before he could catch it, sharp but frightened, not angry. Ramirez raised her hands quickly. "Okay, not touching. Promise." She let the calm settle back into her voice. Just didn't want it to get caught. His shoulders slowly uncoiled, though his breathing stayed fast. After a moment, he whispered, almost to himself, "It's hers." Ramirez's heart gave a small kick. She didn't ask who her was. She didn't need to, but she kept her tone soft and curious. "A bridge, not a push. Important to you?" He nodded once, fiercely. "All right," she said, respecting the boundary. "Then we'll keep it safe." He seemed to breathe easier at that, though his arms never loosened. She let the subject drop and instead talked about practical things. How quiet the road had become, how the other officers were making sure no one could speed by. Anything to restore the fragile trust that had flickered. Inside, though, she filed the moment carefully. A worn leather strap, something his but also hers. Maybe his mother, maybe whatever she'd left him. Something worth protecting through miles of dangerous road. Adams approached again, reading her face before speaking. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," she murmured, eyes still on Eli. Then lower, so the boy wouldn't catch it. "Bag's got something personal. Very personal." Adams nodded, understanding. "We'll steer clear." She gave a tiny smile of thanks and returned her focus to the boy. He was listening again, had angled toward their voices, but less rigid now. It was the smallest shift, but she knew better than to dismiss it. Trust came in inches. "Eli," she said gently after a while, "thank you for letting me know it's important. I'll make sure nobody touches it, but you." "Okay." He hesitated, then nodded just once, the motion stiff but unmistakable. She let a quiet settle, nothing forced, only the sounds of wind and distant tires. For now, that was enough. The first clear clue to whatever journey had pushed him onto this highway alone. Whatever lived inside that backpack wasn't just luggage. It was a connection. Maybe the only one left of the person he'd said was gone. And she understood with sudden clarity why he'd braved so much danger to keep it close. It happened so fast Ramirez's body moved before her brain could. One moment the road was mostly calm, a long stretch of controlled traffic and muted engines. The next, a battered sedan on the far lane coughed a violent bang that cracked through the quiet like a shot. The sound ricocheted off the wet pavement and steel guardrails, louder for the emptiness around them. Eli jerked as if struck. His whole body went rigid and then folded inward. The cane clattered off his lap and slid into the gravel with a sharp, thin rattle. His head ducked and his arms tightened so hard around the backpack that his knuckles turned the color of paper. Ramirez was beside him in an instant, but stopped just short of contact. She'd seen too many frightened kids recoil from a sudden touch. Instead, she planted her boots wide, making her presence solid, and let her voice cut through the echo left by the backfire, low, calm, and steady as bedrock. "Eli, it's okay. Just a car. Nothing's wrong." His breathing had turned ragged, quick, shallow gasps that hitched on each inhale. She could almost feel the adrenaline rolling off him, some old fear awakened by that single explosive noise. She didn't reach for him. She crouched, palms visible, and angled her body so he could sense where she was. "You're safe," she said again, quieter but firmer, willing the words to land over the rush in his ears. I'm right here. Adams was already striding over from his post near the road. Hand lifted to signal the slowing cars to keep moving quietly. He shot Ramirez a look, question, concern, and she gave the smallest shake of her head. Stay back. Don't crowd him. The boy's breath hitched again. He was hunched so low it looked as if he might fold in on himself entirely. She wanted to reach out, but instead she let her voice work first. That sound was just the car's engine. Sometimes they do that when they're old. No one's shooting, no one's coming. It took long, slow seconds, but she saw his spine shift, the tiniest loosening. His hand stayed locked on the backpack, but the knuckles softened a shade. Can I pick up your cane for you? She asked gently, not moving yet. He flinched again at the word, but then, after a pause, gave a quick jerky nod without raising his head. Okay, she said softly. I'm going to lean down and grab it now. She made sure each movement was audible, boots scraping gravel, a soft clearing of her throat, before she reached. The cane was cold and damp where it had landed. She lifted it slowly and laid it across her own knees rather than hand it to him right away. Got it safe? Another breath shut it out of him, still too fast but not gasping now. She waited before speaking again, then said quietly, You did fine. Anyone would jump at a sound like that. Finally, he lifted his head just enough that the edge of his glasses caught a faint gleam of light. He didn't speak, but it was a sign he'd surfaced from whatever place the bang had pulled him into. Ramirez kept her body low and voice gentle. Warner came back. A beat passed before he nodded. She offered it slowly, handle first, making sure he could hear the small shift of metal against her gloves. He reached, hand trembling, and took it back without loosening his hold on the backpack. Good, she said. You're safe. The air between them changed, still taut but not brittle. The road noise remained gentle. Adams had managed to keep curious drivers at bay, their tires whispering past rather than roaring. He stood a respectful distance, scanning but silent. You okay? Ramirez asked after a while. Eli's mouth moved before any sound came. Finally, almost inaudible, thought it was him. Ramirez felt a cold weight drop in her gut, but kept her face still. Not him, she said softly but with conviction. Nobody here is going to hurt you. He gave the faintest shake of his head, whether disagreeing or just shaking off a memory she didn't know. His hands rubbed once along the cane's handle, grounding himself. You're safe here, she repeated, letting the phrase become a steady heartbeat between them. You've got me and Officer Cole. At his name, Adams raised a hand in a slow, easy way from where he stood. Hey, buddy, he called softly, no closer. Just me over here. Eli didn't turn, but the flinch in his shoulders faded. Better? Ramirez asked after a long, quiet stretch. The boy nodded once, small and quick, but real. She took a careful breath, relief subtle but deep. This was how trust was built in crisis. Not by forcing bravery, but by being steady when fear broke through. She didn't ask what him meant. Not yet. She just stayed close enough that if another sound tore the air, she could catch him again, but far enough not to startle. Let's stay sitting a bit longer, she said softly. Road's quiet now. He didn't answer, but his breathing slowed to something closer to normal. The white cane, once clattered to ground, was back under his hand, and though his arms were still wrapped around the backpack, she could see a subtle difference. The grip fierce but no longer desperate, a boy inching back from panic into the small safety she was building, word by word, on the edge of the road. The moment stretched long after the car backfired, and the quiet returned. Eli's breath was still uneven, catching in small stutters, but the panic had ebbed enough for him to stay upright. Ramirez stayed crouched near him, not too close, boots planted, hands loose and visible. Her voice came low and steady, the same patient thread she'd been weaving since she arrived. You're safe, she said again, gentle but firm, like a fact he could hold on to. It's just us here now. Me, Officer Cole, and you. The boy didn't answer, but she saw his jaw work under the collar of his jacket. His hand rubbed the top seam of the backpack in a slow, anxious arc, as though smoothing it could bring his heartbeat down. She waited, letting the silence settle, not rushing. Kids in fear had their own clocks. After a while, She shifted her stance, careful to keep the sound of gravel small and predictable. "Do you want to sit somewhere safer than the ground?" she asked. "There's a bumper on my car right here, just behind you. No one will bother you. Easier to rest." He stiffened at first. She saw the motion ripple up his spine, but she didn't move closer. She let the suggestion hang in the cool morning air, giving him time to weigh it. Another long pause, then the tiniest tilt of his head, a nod so small she almost missed it. "Okay," she said softly, keeping her tone light but sure. "I'll stay right next to you. I'm going to help guide. Just your elbow, nothing else. You'll tell me if it's too much." No reaction, just stillness. She took that as permission to go slow. Ramirez moved closer in careful increments, boots scraping lightly, so he knew she was coming. When she was near enough, she extended one hand toward his sleeve but stopped a breath away. "I'm here," she said. "I'm going to touch just your arm, okay?" A single nod. Her fingertips brushed the edge of his jacket, feather-light. Then her palms settled gently on his elbow. She felt him tense under the contact, not pulling away, but rigid. "We're just going a few steps," she promised. "Straight back." They moved together at a snail's pace. She spoke the ground into existence for him. "Little step here. Good. Now another. Gravel's even." Each cue was quiet but precise. He followed, shaky but willing, the backpack welded to his chest like a shield. His cane stayed in his free hand, swinging lightly, testing each inch before he committed. After 4 or 5 small steps, they reached the cruiser. Ramirez tapped the bumper lightly so the sound would guide him. "That's the car," she said. "You can sit right here, nice and solid." He hesitated, then slowly slid onto the cool metal. His knees drew up a bit, and the backpack stayed pressed between them and his chest, arms locked around it. His head tipped forward, as though hiding behind his familiar weight. "You did great," Ramirez said softly, crouching beside him again, but leaving a few inches of air between them. "That was brave, Eli." He didn't answer, but his breathing evened out more quickly this time. The rigid arch of his back softened by a hair, not relaxed, but less ready to bolt. She took it as the fragile victory it was. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Adams had stepped further into the road to direct the last straggling cars, and another officer was setting cones with careful, quiet motions. The world around them had grown strangely still compared to the chaos of earlier. Only the whisper of wind and the soft pop of cooling metal from the engine filled the space. Ramirez kept her gaze soft and let the quiet work. She'd learned years ago that children living in fear needed to feel control, return in tiny pieces. Forcing conversation would only send him deeper into the shell he'd built. When she did speak, it was simple and safe. "The bumper's a good spot, isn't it?" "Solid, won't move." He gave a tiny nod. His fingers flexed once on the backpack strap, then stilled again. "You can stay there as long as you need," she said. "Nobody's rushing you." Another quiet beat, and then she caught a whisper, almost lost to the breeze. "Thanks." It was small and hoarse and hesitant, but it was thanks. She let it settle without making a fuss, just a quiet, "You're welcome." For the first time since she'd seen him, the boy didn't look like he was about to vanish at the first wrong move. He still clung to the backpack, but now it seemed less like a lifeline and more like something he could breathe behind while deciding whether the world was safe. Ramirez stayed beside him, silent except for the small, steady words that built trust one brick at a time. They were far from answers, far from home, but he had let her guide him, and for a child who'd walked alone into speeding traffic, that single act meant more than any file or database could say. By the time the sun had fully broken a low fog and turned the wet asphalt into a dull silver ribbon, a new set of headlights pulled onto the shoulder. The vehicle didn't carry the urgent edge of the first 2 units. It rolled in slow and deliberate, hazards flashing a patient amber. Ramirez clocked the markings before the door even opened. Supervisor's SUV. A tall man stepped out, not rushed, not loud, the kind of entrance that didn't rattle fragile situations. Sergeant Mark Delaney. She'd worked with him before on domestic calls, where children were caught in the crossfire of adult chaos. He had a reputation for reading the air before stepping in. Ramirez stayed where she was beside Eli, not moving to greet him. She felt the boy tense just from the sound of another door shutting. Her hand stayed near, but not touching his arm, a quiet anchor. Delaney must have seen the movement because he stopped a good 20 feet away and lifted his hand in a small, easy greeting. No wave, no attention-grabbing flourish. Just enough for Ramirez to see and answer with a nod. "Morning," he said quietly, voice carrying just enough for her, but not enough to reach the boy if he didn't want to hear it. "You okay here?" "So far," Ramirez replied in the same low tone. She didn't stand. She wanted Eli to know nothing, and his immediate world was changing. Delaney took a few measured steps closer, boots whispering on the gravel. He stopped well outside the boy's bubble, eyes scanning the scene but landing back on Ramirez. "Brief me?" "Male child about 11, she said softly, careful with details but not hiding them. "Visually impaired. Name Eli Carter. Ran from home. Says can't go back. No missing report filed. Bag is non-negotiable." She flicked her gaze to the backpack clutched against the boy's chest. Delaney's brow lifted just slightly. Inside, "Unknown. Won't let it go. Called it hers." Ramirez kept her voice neutral, but let the meaning hang. He nodded once, eyes softening. "All right." They stood in quiet agreement for a moment. Delaney scanned control scene, Adams running quiet traffic control, another deputy laying out more cones. Nothing chaotic, nothing that would spook the kid further. Then Delaney lowered his voice another notch. "Let's not push the bag. We'll lose him." "Agreed," Ramirez said instantly. "I'll stay background for now," Delaney added. No new faces in his line of sight. She appreciated that. Too many well-meaning supervisors tried to take over and ended up unraveling hard-won threads. "Thanks, Mark." He gave a small grunt that served as both acknowledgement and support. "CPS?" he asked. "Lines open, no action yet," she answered. "I want to get his sense of safe before we hand him off anywhere." "Good call." Delaney stepped back a few paces, giving physical space while still keeping command presence. He spoke briefly into his radio, likely updating dispatch, but kept the volume turned down so it didn't leak toward Eli. The boy had been silent through the exchange, but not unaware. His chin had lifted a hair, had angled toward the new voice. Ramirez noticed and leaned slightly closer. "That's just another officer," she said quietly. "His name's Mark. He's here to help, but he's going to stay back, so you don't feel crowded." Eli didn't answer, but his shoulders eased by the smallest fraction. Ramirez let the quiet return. She could feel Delaney's steady presence behind her, not intrusive, just a reliable backstop. It allowed her to focus fully on the boy. After long, while Delaney moved closer again, only a few steps, and crouched to make himself less a looming shape. He kept his distance, hands easy at his sides. "Hey, Eli," he said gently, voice trained for exactly this kind of moment. "I'm Sergeant Delaney. I help kids when things get scary. I'm going to stand over here with Officer Ramirez, all right?" The boy turned his head slightly toward the sound, uncertain but not recoiling. "No one's going to take your bag," Delaney added, voice sure but calm. "You keep it. That's yours." Ramirez saw the tiniest exhale leave Eli's chest at those words, and she caught Delaney's brief glance. Good call, no pressure. They didn't ask more. Instead, the two officers quietly talked logistics while keeping the child in a bubble of safety. Delaney murmured about getting a child advocate en route, someone trained to help with next steps without stripping control away. Ramirez nodded, grateful. They discussed gently how to get him off the highway without making the move feel like capture. Maybe just a slow walk to the cruiser, maybe a blanket if he wanted warmth. "Not yet, though," Ramirez said quietly. "He just let me guide him here. Let's not break the trust." "Understood," Delaney said. They let time pass like that, a quiet perimeter of care slowly forming. More units present but subdued, no loud radios, no sudden movements. Each officer who arrived got a quiet hand signal to keep voices down and eyes soft. The scene looked controlled from the outside, but up close it was something else. A protective shell built so a frightened boy could keep breathing without retreating deeper into fear. Ramirez stayed grounded next to Eli, aware of how much he was watching without looking. The new sergeant's restraint and the silent choreography among the officers told her they were doing this right. No hurry, no force, just small, deliberate steps toward trust. She looked at the boy's thin shoulders, still curled but no longer vibrating with panic, and thought, we're slowly, carefully, giving him a world that won't lurch or grab. A world that, maybe for the first time in a long while, is safe enough for him to stay. For a long time, there was only the sound of tires sliding slowly over wet pavement, and the muted chatter of radios turned low. Ramirez stayed beside Eli on the bumper, shoulders angled just enough that he could sense her there, but never feel cornered. Sergeant Delaney kept his quiet post a few paces back. Weight shifted onto one foot in an easy stance that said no rush, no threat. The boy's breathing had steadied to something almost normal, though his hands still clutched the backpack, so tightly the knuckles showed pale. She let the quiet do its work until the road itself seemed to breathe slower. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, not breaking the calm. "Eli," she said, leaning slightly so the sound reached him and no one else. "Can I ask one more thing?" "Only if you want." He turned his face toward her voice, hesitant but listening. "I want to understand why you had to leave," she said, careful not to say home. "Not everything. Just enough so we can keep you safe." The boy swallowed. A tiny sound escaped him, a squeak more than a word. Then silence again. She didn't push, only waited. After what felt like forever, he whispered, so soft she had to lean closer to hear. "Bad things." Ramirez kept her own breathing steady. "Bad things where you were?" A nod. She didn't ask what kind. She knew the risk of rushing details. Instead, "It's okay to say just that." He shifted the bag slightly, his chin dipping down to its canvas edge like a shield. Then, halting and shaky, "When Dad drinks." Every nerve in Ramirez's body wanted to react. Anger, protective fury. But she kept her face soft, her voice low. "I hear you." He gets loud. Eli said, voice cracking. "Break stuff." She could almost see the scenes he wasn't describing. The shattering, the unpredictable chaos that makes every night a minefield. "That sounds scary," she said. He didn't answer, but the tiniest tremor ran through him, the body's involuntary truth. "Did he hurt you?" she asked, still careful but needing to know. A long pause, then a small shrug that looked more like defeat than dismissal. "Sometimes." Her stomach twisted. She kept her voice from shaking. "I'm sorry, Lai." His mouth opened like he might say something else, but only a thin breath came out. Then, with surprising suddenness, another truth slid free. Mom's gone. Ramirez stilled completely. Not to scare him, but to hold space for what he'd just said. "Gone?" she asked gently. He nodded once, hard enough that his glasses slipped down again. "Nobody says where. Just gone." His lower lip trembled, but he clamped his teeth over it. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. It felt inadequate, but it was true. "That's a lot for you to hold alone." He pulled the backpack tighter, as if the leather strap inside could anchor him against everything missing. "She left me stuff," he said after a beat, voice breaking around the words. "In your bag." Ramirez asked softly, a small, almost imperceptible nod. "That's why it's so important," she said, mostly to show she understood. He sniffed once and rubbed his sleeve across his cheek. If he found it, he'd take it. Ramirez felt a pulse of fierce protectiveness, but didn't let it sharpen her voice. He's not going to get it. Not here. Not now. Something in him seemed to falter at that, not quite trust, but the first wisp of relief. His shoulders sagged an inch. He didn't release the bag, but his grip eased enough to let circulation return to his fingers. Behind him, Delaney had taken a subtle step closer, not crowding but making sure he was within earshot if needed. Ramirez glanced up and met his eyes. She saw the flicker of pain there, the way every cop who'd done this work long enough felt the blow of a child naming fear, so plainly. Delaney gave a tiny nod. "Keep going, you're doing fine." Ramirez returned to Eli, still gentle. "You were really brave to leave when you felt unsafe," she said. "That takes strength." He made a small noise, half scoff, half sob. "Didn't feel brave." "Brave isn't about feeling it," she answered softly. "It's about doing what you need to survive." He didn't respond, but she saw his throat move as he swallowed hard. His eyes, hidden behind dark glasses, stayed down, but his body no longer looked like it was ready to spring away. "We're going to make sure you don't have to go back there," she said, slow and deliberate, each word chosen. "There are safe places, people who can help." He clutched the bag tighter again, but nodded faintly, a sign he'd heard and maybe believed a piece of it. For a while, they just sat with the weight of what had been spoken. Ramirez didn't ask for more. She knew enough now. A father's drinking, a house full of breaking things, a mother vanished into some silence no one would explain, and a boy carrying what little remained of her through traffic and danger, because no one else would keep it safe. Delaney moved quietly closer, stopping well short but close enough for his voice to reach. "We'll make sure of that," he said, calm and certain. "You're not alone anymore." Eli didn't look up, but a long, trembling breath came out of him, and for the first time it didn't sound like panic. It sounded like something loosening, the smallest thread of trust unsealing at last. For a long time after the words about his father and the drinking faded into the misted air, no one spoke. The shoulder of the road had gone strangely still, just a muted rumble of far-off traffic and the slow blink of hazard lights. Ramirez stayed crouched a few feet from the bumper where Eli sat, not trying to fill the quiet. She had learned the shape of silence when children reached the end of running. It could be a fragile thing, easily broken if someone rushed to patch it. Eli sat very small against the backdrop of steel and sky, the backpack pulled into the space between his ribs and the world. His hands kept moving over the fabric in tiny, restless strokes, thumb catching at frayed seams, fingertips tracing the faint outline of whatever was inside. Each pass seemed to calm him a fraction, but it also looked like he was working himself toward something. She didn't press, just waited, eyes soft, voice ready but still. After a long stretch, he took a breath, so careful she almost missed it. The little sound of the zipper tugging came next, quiet but unmistakable. Ramirez didn't move. She knew how easily trust could spook if it felt observed. The zipper caught halfway. His small hands trembled so badly he had to stop, press his lips together, and start again. He unfastened just enough to open the bag a few inches and reached inside with gentleness that broke her heart. When his hands came back out, they carried an object she recognized instantly, a small Braille Bible. The black leather softened and polished from years of fingers passing over its cover. The edges were rubbed nearly gray, and the brass zipper that ran around its binding was dulled with time. He held it like a living thing. "It's hers," he whispered, voice splintered but sure. Ramirez nodded slowly, throat tight. "Your mom's?" A tiny, trembling nod. "She read to me. Before." He trailed off and bit his lip. "It's beautiful," Ramirez said quietly. "I can see she loved it." His fingers stroked the cover once. Then he swallowed and reached back into the backpack. This time he pulled out a bundle bound with a faded blue ribbon. Paper edges curled and soft from handling. Each envelope worn but carefully saved. The bundle was thick, dozens, maybe more. He turned it once in his hands, so the scrawled black marker showed. His name, written in a looping hand. "She wrote me letters," he said, almost himself. "For later. Dad didn't know. She said to keep them safe." Ramirez felt something catch hard in her chest. She'd seen kids' guard scraps, photos, stuffed animals, drawings. But this felt different. A lifeline mapped out in advance. A mother who must have known her son would need something stronger than memory. "That's why you kept the bag so close," she said softly. He nodded, still trembling. If he found them, he'd burn them. His voice cracked, and he squeezed his eyes shut behind the dark glasses. "I had to take them." Ramirez wanted to reach out, to put a hand over his shaking ones, but she didn't. Instead, she gave him what she could. Quiet, unflinching respect. "You were right," she said gently. "You kept them safe. You did exactly what she asked." For the first time, she saw a single tear escape beneath the edge of his glasses, tracking slowly down his cheek. He didn't wipe it, just let it fall. His small body seemed to sag with relief and exhaustion at once, like the simple act of showing the contents had stolen what little strength he had left. Sergeant Delaney, standing a few paces back, stayed silent but took one respectful step closer, Not intrusion, just presence. He met Ramirez's eyes and gave a small nod. We see what matters now. Ramirez spoke again, quiet but firm. No one is going to take these from you, Eli. Not me. Not anyone here. They'll stay yours. He sniffed and clutched the Bible and letters tighter to his chest for a moment before easing them back into backpack with great care. Each motion was deliberate. Bundle first, Bible next, zipper drawn slowly until it clicked shut. Then he hugged the bag again, but the hold looked different, protective still, but no longer desperate. That's all I have left, he said in a small, tired voice. It's enough, Ramirez answered softly. Because it's her love. She made sure you'd have it. He sat still for a long time, and she let him, not trying to fix or fill the space. What mattered was that he'd chosen to show her. That was trust on the edge of breaking and rebuilding. When he finally exhaled, it sounded almost like relief. Ramirez shifted just enough, so he could hear her clearly. We're going to help you find a safe place for you and those things. You won't have to keep running. Eli didn't speak, but he gave one small, tired nod. Then his hand stopped trembling and simply rested on the bag. For the first time since she'd seen him on the road, he looked less like a child fighting to vanish and more like one holding on to something that might let him stay. The morning had stretched into a pale gray, the mist finally thinning enough that the outlines of trees and fence posts appeared on the far side of the highway. Ramirez stayed next to Eli, close but not crowding, watching the slow rhythm of his breath. After showing the Bible and letters, he seemed emptied out, not panicked, just drained, like the long night of fear had finally caught him. She wanted to give him quiet, but there was one thing she needed to know before anyone could help him beyond this shoulder of asphalt. Eli, she said gently, letting his name sit in the cool air for a beat. Would it be okay if we looked at just one letter? We don't have to read all of them. I want to help you get somewhere safe, and maybe she left a place for you. His head tilted slightly toward her, wary but listening. His hands tightened on the backpack. You can hold them, Ramirez added. You keep control. I just want to know if your mom left an address or someone's name. He was silent long enough that she thought she'd pushed too far. Then in a small voice, she said, if things got bad, find Aunt Sarah. He swallowed, the words hard to get out. But I don't know where she lives. Ramirez's heart leapt quietly. A name, a lifeline. She kept her face calm and voice even. That's really good, Eli. Would you be willing to check one letter together? We'll only look for what you want. He hesitated, hands hovering over the zipper. Then, with a small, determined nod, he pulled the bag into his lap and slowly unzipped. His fingers trembled but worked carefully, like opening something sacred. He drew out the bundle tied with a blue ribbon and held it for a long moment, thumb rubbing the top envelope. I'll hold it steady while you look, Ramirez offered, but she didn't reach. He shook his head and instead slid one envelope free himself. It was creased from travel and age, but still sealed. He broke the flap with trembling hands and pulled out a folded sheet. He didn't pass it to her. Instead, he held it up and turned it just enough so she could help read the print. His fingers stayed on the edges, his possession unmistakable. Ramirez leaned close enough to see, but kept her hands in her lap. The handwriting was neat and flowing, each letter raised slightly, printed so a blind child could trace if he learned. Across the top, a simple greeting. My Eli, my brave boy. Ramirez had to swallow before reading more. She skimmed quietly, her eyes catching on practical phrases among the love poured across the page. Asterisk, if it's not safe, you go. Don't wait. Don't let fear keep you there. Asterisk, and then, further down, underlined, asterisk, find Sarah Whitlow, my sister. She lives in Greenfield. Ask for the White House with a maple tree. She will know you and keep you safe. Asterisk. Ramirez exhaled slowly. She looked at Eli, still clutching the page like a lifeline. Your mom was smart, she said quietly. She left you a way out. His head dipped, but there was something new in the line of his shoulders. Not just fear now, but a flicker of direction. She says Greenfield. Ramirez went on gently, and your aunt's name is Sarah Whitlow. That's something we can find. Eli's hands tightened on the letter. She'll take me? Ramirez nodded without hesitation. I can't imagine she wouldn't. And we can call... Check. Make sure before we move anywhere. For a moment his lips trembled, and then he whispered, I didn't know where to go. Just walked. That was enough, she said softly. You kept yourself alive. You kept her letters safe. Now we can help with the rest. Behind them, Delaney took a slow step closer, careful not to loom. Greenfield's in the next county. He said quietly to Ramirez, we can get an address fast. Ramirez nodded, but didn't look away from the boy. Eli, can we ask our dispatcher to help find Aunt Sarah? Just to know where she is. He hesitated, then gave the smallest nod. Okay, that's all we'll do, she promised. We won't let anyone else have your letters. They're yours. He clutched the sheet to his chest for a moment before sliding it carefully back into its envelope, then tucking the bundle deep inside the backpack. The zipper rasped closed, a sound final but no longer frantic. For the first time, his shoulders lowered in a way that looked almost like relief. He wasn't smiling. The day was still too heavy for that. But some of the pure edge of survival had eased. He had a thread now, a place to point his steps. Ramirez reached over slowly and tapped the bumper beside him, a tiny, grounding sound. You did good, Eli. She'd be proud. His head dipped, and for a fleeting second, the corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but the first sign of something lighter trying to surface. Then he settled back against the cool metal, backpack hugged close but no longer barricade tight. A boy holding both grief and hope in the same small frame while the grown-ups around him finally had a map. Something in Ramirez shifted the moment she heard the name and saw the letters slip back into the pack. Up until then, everything about her had been the slow patience of triage. Stabilize, don't scare, don't break what little trust a child can offer. But now there was a thread to follow, a direction that didn't end with more cold bureaucracy. She felt her own breathing deepen, shoulders square. This wasn't just extraction anymore. It was a mission. She straightened slowly from her crouch, careful not to jolt Eli, and spoke first thing before she moved anywhere. I'm going to step back for a second and call someone who can help us find your aunt. I'll stay right here. You can hear me the whole time. He nodded once without looking up, clutching the bag against his ribs. She could see how spent he was, but also how that single nod meant he trusted her enough to let her move. Ramirez stepped a few feet toward her cruiser and brought the radio up, keeping the volume low. Dispatch 27. Karen's voice came back instantly, gentle but alert. Go ahead, 27. Her own tone was still measured but carried new steel underneath. We have a child, Eli Carter, 11, visually impaired. Unsafe home. Father identified but no return. Child is confirmed next of kin. Aunt Sarah Whitlow, believed to be in Greenfield County. Requesting immediate social services liaison, priority family placement. Karen didn't hesitate. Copy 27. Standing by the patch social. Ramirez looked back toward the bumper. Eli's small frame was motionless, but his head turned slightly toward her voice, as if making sure she was still close. She softened her next words for him, though they went out over the air. We have family to find, she said, letting him hear the promise as much as the radio did. Karen's response came quieter, almost personal despite the static. Understood, Janelle. We'll get you what you need. Delaney had moved up beside her now, far enough not to intrude on the boy, but close enough to catch her words. He gave a single approving nod. That's the right call. Ramirez's jaw was tight, and she didn't try to hide it. He's not going back to that house. Not a chance, Delaney said quietly. She turned slightly, lowering the mic so only Karen would hear. Advise CPS this is an immediate safety removal, but hold on foster placement until we confirm Aunt. We have a viable kinship lead. Copy 27, Karen said. I'll get child and family on the line and search for Sarah Whitlow in Greenfield. Thank you, Ramirez said, the gratitude quiet but fierce. She walked back to the bumper and lowered herself down again, so she was at level with Eli. Hey, she said gently. I'm talking to some people who help kids when they need to find safe family. We're looking for your aunt right now. His chin lifted just enough that she could see the faintest reflection of light in his glasses. Really, she said. You gave us the key. We'll see if she's still there and if she can take you in. He held the backpack a little tighter, but not the desperate clutch from before. She'll want me? Ramirez nodded firmly. She will, and if she doesn't pick up the first time, we'll keep calling until we find her. The boy's shoulders trembled with something she recognized, hope trying to come alive and colliding with exhaustion. He sniffed hard, nodding once. Behind him, Delaney was already quietly instructing another officer to run address checks through their non-emergency lines so it wouldn't sound like sirens and warrants. The perimeter hummed with quiet, purposeful motion now. Everyone had shifted gears the way squads do when there's a clear objective. This was no longer just a call about a lost kid on a dangerous road. It was about building a bridge to safety he could actually believe in. Ramirez looked over her shoulder at the controlled scene. Cones, slowing cars, Adam standing guard. Then back at Eli. She wanted him to feel that he wasn't adrift anymore. See, all these folks, she said softly, they're making sure no one hurts you. Now we're going to find family who loves you. Eli's lip trembled, but he nodded, a single, small motion. She reached one careful hand toward the edge of the bumper, close enough for him to feel, but not forced. You've done the hard part already. You kept her letters safe. You found help. Now, let's do some of the work. He didn't answer, but she saw his breathing deepen, his shoulders lower a fraction. The silence wasn't terror now. It was fragile relief. Her radio clicked again, and Karen's voice came low but sure. 2-7. We have an initial match on Sarah Whitlow in Greenfield. Lives on Maple Street. White House on corner. Listed phone number. Social services online ready when you are. Ramirez's throat tightened, but her voice stayed even. Copy. Hold her contact. I'll advise. She looked at Eli and gave him the faintest smile. We found something. We're going to call. For the first time since she'd seen him on that lethal stretch of road, his face tilted upward, not just toward sound, but toward possibility. He didn't smile back, but there was a light behind the dark lenses, small, new, alive. Ramirez felt that protective fire flare hotter. She wasn't just rescuing anymore. She was delivering him towards something his mother had fought to give him even after she was gone. She pressed her shoulder mic once more, voice low but certain. 2-7 clear. Continue family locate. We're bringing him home. The convoy left the highway quietly. No lights. Just a pair of marked SUVs and Ramirez's cruiser following a county road that wound toward the address Eli had whispered. She hadn't want to go back herself, but there were things they needed to know before handing the boy to anyone. Delaney drove lead. Ramirez followed, the weight of what she'd heard from Eli sitting heavy behind the wheel. She glanced back once at the other cruiser, shadowing them, Adams and another deputy, staying alert but silent. When they turned onto Gravel Drive, the house emerged from a stand of scrub oak, dark against the washed-out morning. The siding peeled in wide curling strips, and 2 front windows were covered with old sheets instead of curtains. An overturned trash can lay half buried in damp leaves. No sign of life, just stillness and the faint smell of stale beer drifting even to the driveway. Delaney parked first and stepped out, his movement slow and deliberate. Ramirez followed, scanning the property. Empty beer bottles glinted in the weeds, and the front porch sagged so low one step had collapsed into the dirt. She radioed in a soft status. 2-7 at location. No contact yet. Delaney tapped lightly on the door with his knuckles, then called out, Sheriff's office. Anyone home? Silence. He tried again, louder, waiting between each call. No answer but the creak of the wind. Check perimeter, he said quietly, and they split, Adams circling wide with eyes on windows, Ramirez moving to the right side where a cracked window frame hung half open. She shone her light just enough to skin inside. Piles of clothes, empty cans, a tip chair. No movement. Delaney returned to the porch and tested the knob. It turned but stuck. He glanced at Ramirez. Entry, he said softly. She nodded. He eased the door open, the hinges shrieking just once before falling silent. Inside smelled like stale smoke and damp. The living room carpet was matted and stained, littered with bottles and fast food wrappers. A television hummed quietly in the corner, dark screen still plugged into the wall. No voices, no footsteps. Clear right. Adams called softly from the kitchen after a moment. Left clear. Ramirez answered from a narrow hall that branched toward bedrooms. They moved together down the hallway. The first door stood open onto what looked like a half-collapsed office. Papers scattered, a tipped file cabinet, more bottles. Another room, bare except for a mattress and piles of clothes. And then they found it. The third door at the very end, locked with an old keyhole, and a dent near the knob where someone had kicked it at once. Ramirez stepped closer and pressed her palm to the frame. The air was cooler here. She imagined a small boy behind it at night, listening to chaos through thin walls. Her stomach tightened. Delaney tested the knob gently. Locked solid. He glanced at her. "Bedroom?" she asked quietly. He nodded. Most likely his. She ran a hand along the cracked paint and saw faint scratches low near the jamb. Maybe a cane, maybe just a frightened child marking time. Her throat tightened. "Any sound?" Adams asked softly, standing guard behind them. "Nothing," Delaney said. "Let's not break it unless we have to." Ramirez took one last look at the door, feeling the weight of what it meant. A space sealed off, a child's world cut small and controlled. "Take photos," she said quietly. "We'll need record." Adams nodded and moved down the hall to document, camera clicking softly. They finished a careful sweep. No sign of the father, no fresh food, no order, just neglect layered deep. In the kitchen, a stack of unpaid bills curled on the counter. The fridge held only beer and expired condiments. Back outside, the air felt cold and clean after the staleness inside. Ramirez stood for a moment staring at the peeling door before she spoke. That's no place for him to go back to. Delaney didn't answer right away. He looked back at the house, jaw set. Finally, quiet but hard. "No, that's just survival and fear in there." Ramirez keyed her mic, voice even but edged with quiet resolve. "Dispatch, residence check complete. Unsafe environment confirmed. Signs of neglect and probable abuse. No subject on scene. Advise, CPS. Do not return child to father." Karen's voice came back steady. "Copy, 2-7. CPS notified." They lingered only long enough to finish documentation. Photos of the locked door, the trash, the beer. Then Delaney closed the sagging front door behind them and let the latch catch. No need to announce anything. The house itself was statement enough. As they walked back to their vehicles, Ramirez felt a hard protectiveness settle in her bones. Seeing the space Eli had fled turned abstract fear into something concrete and foul. The boy's quiet, halting words now at walls, stains, locked doors to match. She glanced at Delaney as engines started up. "We get him to his aunt," she said quietly. He gave a single, sharp nod. No halfway stops. She climbed into her cruiser and sat for a beat before driving, letting the resolve settle so she could be steady again when she returned to the child waiting by the safe blockade of patrol cars. Whatever systems might grind slowly, she had seen enough. That boy would not go back here, not if she had to move every mountain in her path. When Ramirez pulled back onto the highway, the house they had just left shrank behind her until it was only a dark speck swallowed by trees and distance. She kept one hand steady on the wheel and the other hovering near the radio. Ahead, the convoy was pared down now. Delaney had peeled off to finish field reports and coordinate the legal end, while she and Adams carried the boy toward the county center. The road unspooled in a quiet ribbon, and in the rear view she could see Eli's small frame tucked against the door, backpack clutched close as if still bracing for impact. When they reached the low brown building that housed Child and Family Services, the world changed texture. Gone was the crisp air of the roadside. Here everything hummed with bureaucracy. Fluorescent lights hummed above beige linoleum, and faint disinfectant mixed with stale coffee in the hallways. Ramirez felt the shift away one does entering an unfamiliar hospital. Not danger, but a sense of machines grinding forward. She pulled in a slow breath and reminded herself she was the buffer between this boy and any cold process. They were met at the security door by a woman with a tablet and soft eyes behind tired glasses. "Intake?" she asked quietly, glancing at Ramirez, not at Eli. "Emergency," Ramirez answered, voice pitched low to avoid making the word sound like an alarm. Unsafe home, father unfit. Kinship lead, Aunt Sarah Whitlow Greenfield. The woman nodded. Open the door. Come through. Ramirez turned Eli before they moved. We're just going to safe room for a little while. I'll be right there the whole time. He didn't speak but gave a single, small nod. She kept her stride slow as they walked inside, matching his hesitant steps. His free hand tapped his cane lightly along the tile, each sound a reassurance that the world was still there. He held the backpack high and close. They entered a small office set apart from the waiting area. Less harsh lighting. A sofa instead of chairs. A small table with tissues and worn toys. Still too official, but better than the hard benches outside. Ramirez guided him to the sofa and sat beside him, but left space. 2 CPS workers came in, a man with a folder and a younger woman carrying a laptop. Both paused at the threshold, reading the room. Ramirez appreciated that. Too many barged in with pens flying. This is Eli, Ramirez said, calm but clear. He's here voluntarily. Unsafe father, mother deceased, personal belongings intact. The man gave a gentle smile and crouched just enough to appear less imposing. Hi, Eli. My name's Tom. We just want to help you get to someone safe, maybe your aunt. Eli nodded slightly, still hugging his pack. Ramirez spoke before anyone could go further. He's been through a lot. Let's go slow. Tom nodded. The younger woman, Maya, her badge red, sat down cross-legged on the far end of the sofa. She kept her voice light but respectful. Eli, would it be okay if we asked a few questions to help find your aunt? He hesitated and looked toward Ramirez. She smiled gently. I'm right here. You can say yes or no. A small whispered, okay. The questions were brief. Aunt's name, the town, any other details from the letters. Ramirez helped translate when his voice caught, never answering for him but anchoring him with small reassurances. Each time he faltered, she reminded him, you're safe. You're doing fine. While Maya typed, Tom stepped out to make calls. Ramirez stayed put, her presence steady as a stone. The fluorescent light buzzed faintly overhead. The hall outside clicked with doors and low voices. Eli shrank a little from the noise, so she leaned closer and spoke softly. All of this is just steps to make sure you have a place where you're wanted. You're not in trouble. He nodded, but his shoulders stayed tight. An hour passed like that. Forms, phone calls, the low thrum of the system moving, but, for once, not against a child. Ramirez signed witness statements, documented the unsafe home, handed over photos from the locked bedroom and the debris-filled kitchen. A printer chattered out pages. Protective order request, emergency custody authorization. Each document she reviewed herself before letting it near Eli's file. Nothing cold or careless would slip through. At one point he whispered, will I have to stay here? Not here, she promised. Only while we get to your aunt. We're working fast. He nodded and clutched the pack again, but this time his breathing didn't hitch. Maya returned with a thin smile. We reached Sarah Whitlow. She's in Greenfield. Verified address matches your mom's letter. She answered. She said she'll come. Eli's head jerked slightly at the sound, and a small sound escaped him, a mix of hope and fear. She wants you? Ramirez asked gently, even though she already knew. Maya nodded, said yes right away. She's on her way, about an hour out. Ramirez turned to the boy and let warmth enter her voice for the first time all day. Did you hear that, Eli? She's coming for you. He blinked fast behind the dark glasses and ducked his head, shoulders shaking just once. Then he whispered, okay. Ramirez sat quietly beside him, a silent sentinel while the rest of the machine ground on. Paperwork still needed signatures, a judge's quick review for protective order, logistics for transfer. But the worst part, not knowing if there was anyone out there who wanted him, was already breaking apart. She stayed until each page was done, until the emergency custody order bore her signature and the CPS workers promised to handle the legal half while honoring his mother's letters. She stayed because a frightened child should not sit alone under buzzing lights and strange acronyms. And when the last four was slid into its manila jacket and Tom gave a quiet thumbs up, she looked over at the boy hugging his pack and said the only thing that mattered, "You're not going back. We found you're safe." Ramirez stayed with Eli while the CPS team worked their careful rhythm, the room a quiet hum of printers, phones, and low voices. After the first call to Greenfield, after they confirmed that someone named Sarah Whitlow existed and answered, she wanted to be sure no thread was lost. Too many times she had seen addresses go wrong, phone numbers outdated, well-meaning plans stumble. She asked Maya for the letters again, this time only the one Eli had opened. "Would you mind if we look one more time?" she asked the boy softly. "We just want to be sure we have everything your mom left for you. Nothing gets taken away, you hold it." Eli hesitated, then nodded once. He pulled the bundle from his backpack again, the blue ribbon slightly darker from his damp palms. He found the letter he'd shown before and placed it gingerly across his lap, fingers brushing each fold before handing it toward her, but not letting go entirely. Ramirez knelt so they could both see. The page was lined with his mother's looping handwriting, but near the bottom she'd done something deliberate. Printed an address in block letters, each letter heavy and clear, with Braille that's pressed just above. Ramirez traced them lightly with one finger, then stopped and looked at Eli for permission. He gave a tiny nod. The raised dot spelled out what the ink already said. Sarah Whitlow, Maple Street, Greenfield. There was even a note beneath, written in a careful slope. 2 counties over from home. You'll know the maple tree in front. Ramirez exhaled, an odd mixture of grief and gratitude tightening her throat. This mother had known what she was doing, not trusting memory alone. She'd carved a road map in words her son could feel. "Your mom was incredible," she said quietly, more to herself than anyone. Eli's lip trembled, but he held the page steady. She said if it got bad and I couldn't see the signs or streets, the Braille would help. "That was very smart," Ramirez said, keeping her voice soft but steady. "She made sure you could find her sister, no matter what." Maya leaned in gently, eyes wide with respect, and took a quick note of the full address. Greenfield County confirmed the street matches. Number might be older, but we're running it now. Tom slipped back into the room, phone still in hand. Spoke again with Sarah. She knows the house and the maple. She was crying when she realized he's safe. She said she'll come right now. She's already driving. Ramirez felt a warmth break through her professional calm. Did she confirm relationship? Older sister, Tom said. Says she lost touch when the father moved towns, but she always worried. Eli's hands clenched around the letter. A single tear slid under his glasses and landed on the paper. He didn't wipe it away. "Hey," Ramirez said softly, catching his attention with her voice alone. "That's good news, right? You found her." "She'll really want me?" he asked, so small it was barely sound. "She's on her way," Ramirez said with quiet certainty. "That's what wanting looks like." He nodded once, swallowed, and carefully slid the page back into its envelope. She watched how gently he retied the ribbon, making sure every letter stayed in order. When he was finished, he tucked the bundle back into the backpack and zipped it up, slow and deliberate, as if sealing something precious, but safe now that its secret had done its work. Maya handed Ramirez a small notepad. "Judge has signed emergency protective order. He's legally under our custody until the aunt arrives, and we can verify placement. You'll stay?" "I'll stay," Ramirez said without hesitation. They moved to a quieter office with softer chairs, away from the intake desk. Someone brought water in a paper cup. Eli clutched it, but didn't drink much. He leaned back against the cushion, exhaustion heavy on his small frame. Ramirez sat nearby, not crowding but present. While paperwork was finalized and calls made to arrange a transfer once the aunt arrived, she and Eli spoke in low tones. Nothing big, just anchors. How far Greenfield was, that the maple tree his mother mentioned was still there according to Sarah. She described what a maple looked like in spring, wide and bright and safe to sit under. Eli listened, small shoulders sagging but no longer caving inward. Tom came back one last time, smiling gently. "Sarah's about 40 minutes out now. She sounded steady, wants to bring some things for him." Eli nodded, and for the first time, his grip on the backpack eased. He even set it down at his side, one hand still resting protectively but not locked. Ramirez felt something loosen, in her chest at the sight. Outside the fluorescent world, clouds were breaking and a pale sun slipped through. Ramirez looked at the boy and thought of how far he had come since that first moment alone on wet asphalt. A name, an address spelled twice, ink in Braille, had built a bridge the system could follow. His mother, gone but still fiercely present, had given him directions for survival, and he had been brave enough to carry them this far. "You're almost there," Ramirez said softly. He tilted his head toward her voice, a tiny, tired smile trying to form and almost making it. "Almost," he whispered. And for the first time since dawn, the word didn't sound like running. It sounded like arriving. Ramirez signed the last sheet, slid back across the desk, and felt the weight of fluorescent hours ease off her shoulders. The paperwork was done, protective order filed, emergency placement approved. A social worker offered to drive Eli to Greenfield, but Ramirez shook her head before the question fully landed. She'd been there since the first 911 call. She wasn't handing this boy to a stranger now. When they stepped out of the building, the air was cool and washed clean by the earlier mist. Eli paused at the threshold, fingers tightening on his backpack strap. She slowed her stride to match his hesitant steps and guided him gently toward her cruiser. He ran one hand along the smooth metal defender before climbing in, careful, deliberate, needing to know what he was stepping into. She waited until he'd settled and found the seatbelt by touch before closing the door softly. Inside, the car smelled faintly of rain and clean vinyl. She started the engine but didn't shift into drive yet. Instead, she looked back and said, "We've got about an hour to your aunt's town. You okay riding with me?" He nodded, small but sure. His backpack was hugged close, but now his left hand slid inside and brought out the bundle of letters. He didn't open them, just held them across his lap, thumb rubbing the ribbon. "Want music?" she asked, gentle, no pressure. Another small nod. She turned the dial to a country station she'd use on late-night patrols. The kind where songs come slow and easy, not too loud, just enough to fill silence without pushing it away. The first notes drifted, steel guitar, low voice. Eli tilted his head slightly toward the sound, calibrating. As they pulled out of the parking lot and onto the county road, Ramirez kept her voice soft and occasional. This station's good for long drives. Slow songs, nothing sudden. Eli's mouth moved in the faintest whisper, maybe repeating the words so he'd remember. They drove through fields gone pale with early autumn. Patches of mist still tucked in hollows, telephone poles clicked by in even rhythm. Each time they passed a car, Ramirez signaled early and kept her lane wide. She wanted him to feel the car as a safe place, predictable. Halfway down a quiet stretch, he spoke for the first time since leaving the office. "She'll know me?" Ramirez glanced at the rear view but kept her eyes mostly on the road, not one to pin him with her gaze. "She knows your name. She knows your mom. She's been waiting to hear from you, even if she didn't know how." He pressed the bundle tighter to his chest, then loosened again, a tiny test of letting go. "I don't remember her." "That's okay," Ramirez said. "She remembers you. That's what matters." They fell back into comfortable quiet. The radio hummed with gentle lyrics about homecoming and safe roads. Ramirez watched the boy's shoulders slowly drop inch by inch as the miles passed. He rested his head against the cool glass of the window but stayed alert, counting turns maybe, orienting himself by motion and sound. Now and then she narrated small things to help him build a mental map. "We're turning left onto Route 12, bridge coming, hear the hum under the tires, wide field on your right." Each time he gave a tiny nod, letting her know the cues helped. At one point a commercial came on louder than the songs had been. Ramirez reached to lower the volume but caught herself. "Too loud?" "No," he said softly, surprising her. Then, after a pause, "Thanks for asking." She smiled, unseen by him but real. "Always." The hours stretched but didn't drag. Each mile seemed to pull a little more fear off him. Once, she heard the soft rustle of paper and glanced in the mirror. He loosened the ribbon enough to slide one letter free, not to read but to hold it flat against his palm. Maybe feeling the raised dots, maybe just needing the physical reminder of his mother's plan. "You can read while we drive if you want," she said gently. "I like just holding it," he replied, voice barely above the hum of tires. That works too. They passed the county line. A green sign whispered welcome to Greenfield County. Ramirez announced it softly, so he could map the milestone. He sat up a little straighter, still hugging the letter. Almost there, she told him. We'll meet your aunt at the station, just a safe public place first. Then she can take you home. He nodded but didn't speak. His other hand tightened on the seatbelt, grounding himself. Country music rolled on, soft and unintrusive. She let it fill the car, a backdrop to the quiet work of a boy shifting from survival to something like arrival. Each mile felt fragile but right. Not a chase anymore, but a road toward chosen safety. As they came into town, Ramirez slowed, letting him hear the new sounds. A church bell in the distance, dogs somewhere behind fences, the rumble of a pickup turning off Main Street. This is Greenfield, she said softly. She's close. For the first time, his voice had a note of something other than fear. Okay. It was small, but it was hope taking its first deep breath. Ramirez eased the car into the station lot, heart tight but steady. She glanced back just once and saw him sitting upright, letters in his lap, backpack at his side, as ready as a boy can be after a night that nearly broke him. And she thought, not for the first time that day, how extraordinary it was what one child could carry, and how sacred the work of carrying the last miles to safety. The road narrowed as it left the small main drag of Greenfield and turned into a quiet lane lined with maple and birch. Ramirez slowed the cruiser to a crawl, letting the tires crunch softly over gravel so the boy could orient himself. The houses here were older but kept with care. Porches sagged slightly yet showed swept steps and flower pots. The air smelled faintly of wood smoke and wet leaves. She glanced into the rear view. Eli was sitting forward now, letters still in his lap, backpack strapped tight again but not desperate, protective but purposeful. His head tilted as if listening to the new world outside. We're almost there, Ramirez said softly. Number 32. Your mom said a white house with maple in front. He didn't answer but shifted as if bracing for something enormous. When they turned into a short gravel drive, the white house came into view, plain but tidy. Porch rail painted fresh, a wide maple arcing over the yard, leaves gold and scarlet with early fall. Ramirez felt her chest tighten. Some part of her wanted this place to be safe before she'd even met the woman inside. As the cruiser eased to a stop, the front door opened fast, but not wildly, just enough to show someone had been waiting by the window. A woman stepped out, maybe mid-40s, dark hair pulled into a messy knot, sweater sleeves pushed up as if she'd been pacing. Her face was pale with worry and wet at the edges where tears had either begun or just dried. She took one step onto the porch, then froze when she saw the patrol car. Ramirez cut the engine and let the moment breathe before moving. She didn't want to spook either of them. She climbed out slowly, palms visible, and called gently, "Sarah Whitlow?" The woman nodded once, quick and sharp. "Yes, Sarah, you have." Her voice broke and she swallowed. "Eli." Ramirez glanced toward the back seat. "He's here. Safe. Can I bring him to you?" Sarah nodded but stayed rooted to the porch, hands gripping the railing until her knuckles whitened. Ramirez opened the back door and crouched slightly so she met the boy's height. "That's her," she said softly. "Your Aunt Sarah. She's right there." Eli's breathing quickened, a tiny tremor running through him. His hand went to the letters again, then back to the backpack strap. "It's really her," he whispered. "It's really her," Ramirez said, sure as a promise. "She came for you." He didn't move right away. She let him take the time. After a long, shaky breath, he slid out of the seat, one foot then the other, cane in one hand, letters clutched in the other. Ramirez hovered just behind, close enough if he stumbled, but not steering him. When his shoes touched the gravel, the woman on the porch gasped, a small, involuntary sound like a breath finally coming after too long. She took one step down, then another, but stopped halfway, giving him room. "Eli," she said, voice trembling but gentle. He turned his head slightly toward her voice, shoulders tight, small and unsure. "Aunt Sarah?" It came out almost like a guess. "Yes, sweetheart," she said, and then her hands flew to her mouth. "Yes, it's me." Something broke then. The stiff line of the boy's back softened. His chin wobbled. He didn't run, but he took 2 tentative steps forward until he was just within reach. She came down the last stairs slowly, tears spilling now, but not wild. When she reached him, she didn't pull him in, just knelt so they were face to face. "I'm here," she whispered, voice shaking but sure. "I'm so sorry it took so long. I should have." She stopped, swallowed, and started again. "You're safe now." Eli made a small sound somewhere between a sob and a sigh. He didn't collapse into her, but his hands shifted so the letters were no longer clutched like a weapon. They hung gently at his side. Sarah looked up at Ramirez, gratitude and grief tangled on her face. "Thank you," she mouthed, no sound. Ramirez gave a small nod and stepped back, letting the scene belong to them. After a long, quiet moment, Sarah reached out but kept her touch light, just brushing Eli's sleeve. "Can I hold you?" she asked softly. He hesitated, then nodded once, and then he was in her arms, awkward at first and then fiercely, small body shaking against her shoulder. She held him like something precious she was afraid to drop. Ramirez turned slightly away, giving them privacy, blinking hard at the sudden burn in her eyes. She'd seen reunions before, but rarely one built from such careful threads. A mother's letters, a boy's courage, a map in Braille, a night on the road. Sarah stroked the back of his head and whispered things too soft to catch. Promises, apologies, love reawakened after silence. When she finally looked up again, she met Ramirez's gaze and managed a trembling smile. "He's safe now," she said quietly. Ramirez nodded. "He is. And you got what you need to keep him safe?" Sarah's jaw firmed, a protective fire in her eyes. "Yes, absolutely." Ramirez looked down at the boy, still clinging but no longer rigid. "You did it, Eli," she said softly. "You're where your mom wanted you to be." He didn't look up, but his arm tightened briefly around Sarah, and that was answer enough. The hug stayed quiet for a long time, no frantic movement, just a small boy pressed into a sweater that smelled faintly of wood smoke and lavender soap. Sarah held him as if she were memorizing the shape of him, her chin tucked into his damp hair, shoulders shaking but not pulling him tighter than he could stand. Ramirez stayed back by the cruiser, giving them the wide, invisible space that reunion needs. Eli shifted after a while, pulling back an inch but not fully letting go. His hand still clung to the front of Sarah's sweater. He lifted his face slowly, hesitant. The dark glasses tilted upward like someone searching for light he couldn't see. He looked somewhere just past her chin, but it wasn't sight that was working. It was listening, smelling, reaching for proof with other senses. Sarah understood without needing to be told. She bent her head until her voice was close enough for him to feel the tremor of it. "It's me, Eli. I'm your Aunt Sarah. You're safe." He inhaled sharply, and something in his small frame seemed to loosen. He leaned closer, nose brushing against her shoulder for a second, then whispered so quietly Ramirez had to strain to catch it. "You smell like her." Sarah's breath hitched. "Your mom and I, we use the same soap," she said, laughing once through a sob. "She used to send it to me." That tiny anchor, scent and memory colliding, seemed to cut the last thread of doubt in him. His hands trembled and then latched tighter for just a moment before loosening into a real embrace, the first voluntary one since he'd stepped out of cruiser. "You found me," he said, voice cracking wide open. Sarah nodded fiercely, though he couldn't see it, one hand sliding gently up and down his back. "We found each other," she whispered back. "Your mom wanted this. She wanted you safe with me." He made a small sound, half sob, half sigh, and buried his face against her collarbone. His grip on the backpack strap eased. For the first time, he trusted it wouldn't vanish if he let go. Ramirez felt her throat tighten and forced herself to breathe evenly. She watched the tiny details. The way Sarah kept checking his cues before moving closer, how she gave him time to choose each step. This was family reassembling itself in real time, built not on easy familiarity, but on recognition deeper than sight. After a while, Sarah leaned back enough to put her palms lightly on either side of his shoulders. "Can I see you?" she asked softly. And when he nodded, she cupped his cheeks briefly, careful not to make him feel trapped. "You look so much like her," she whispered, tears slipping freely now. "I don't know what I look like. Eli said, almost apologetic. You look loved, she answered, and pulled him close again. Ramirez swallowed hard and cleared her throat gently, reminding herself she still had a job to finish. Sarah, she said quietly, stepping a little closer but still leaving the space theirs. The protective order's in place. He's safe to leave with you. There's some follow-up visits from CPS, but nothing that will hurt this moment. You'll have time to breathe. Sarah nodded quickly, still keeping one arm around Eli. Thank you, she said, voice breaking again. Thank you for bringing him here. Ramirez looked down at the boy. You ready to go with your Aunt Kiddo? He lifted his face toward the sound of her voice, tear streaks catching the late light. Yeah, he whispered, if she's really mine. Sarah laughed a soft, watery laugh and hugged him close again. I'm really yours. Always have been. They stood like that for another long minute. Eli finally turned slightly, not away, but enough to pull the backpack around his front again. His fingers found the zipper and tugged it halfway, just enough to touch the letters in the Bible inside, a small ritual of reassurance. Then he zipped it again and shifted it onto his back, as if he could finally carry it without guarding every inch. You'll come visit? He asked Ramirez suddenly, quiet but clear. Ramirez smiled. If you want me to, and I'll check in until you're settled. Okay, he said, and the words sounded different now. Not survival, not fear, just a boy agreeing to a future. Sarah reached for his hand, and this time he let her take it without flinch or hesitation. She started toward the porch, slow and patient, letting him set the pace. He turned once, just his head, toward the sound of the cruiser and the woman who'd pulled him off the road and into safety. Thank you, he said softly. Ramirez nodded even though he couldn't see it, her voice steady. You did the hard part, Eli. I just drove. Then he turned back and let Sarah guide him up the steps, one careful foot at a time. Each step seemed to melt another layer of danger away. By the time they reached the door, the boy who stood alone on roaring asphalt was inside a house where love waited, carried there by his own courage and quiet, steady hands that refused to let him vanish. The door closed with a quiet click that sounded nothing like the slam of the house he had left. Inside, the air smelled warm and lived in, faint with polished bread, the same lavender soap clinging to Sarah's sweater. She guided him just past the threshold into a small living room filled with the hum of an old clock and the soft scrape of a rocking chair someone had pushed aside to clear space. She didn't let go of his hand until he stopped moving, then paused and gave him time to feel where he was. You're safe here, she whispered, voice still shaky but steadier now that the child was under her roof. Eli stood perfectly still, backpack clutched against his chest, as if it could vanish in this new place. His head moved slightly, cataloging the sounds, a kettle ticking faintly somewhere, the wood floors creak, the steady rhythm of Sarah's breath near his shoulder. It's quiet, he said at last, surprised. It's meant to be, she answered. No yelling, no breaking things. That broke something in him. His fingers loosened just a fraction on the straps, then tightened again, unsure. Sarah, Caroline to some, but family to him now, read the hesitation and didn't reach. She simply sat down on the nearest couch and kept her voice level. Whenever you want, you can put the bag down. No one here will touch it without asking. He hovered a few feet away, small shoulders pulled up tight. Then, slowly, he took one uncertain step forward and another until the couch edge touched his shin. He stayed standing for a beat longer, then let himself fold down beside her, still holding the pack. Sarah didn't speak. She only waited. The clock ticked, and a dog barked far away down the street. At last his arms sagged with exhaustion. The backpack slid forward an inch, then another, until it rested on his knees instead of being locked to his chest. I've been carrying forever, he said in a voice so small she almost missed it. I know, she answered softly. He turned his face toward hers, trusting sound more than sight. It's heavy. I can hold it with you, she said, and kept her hands in her lap, waiting. For a long moment he didn't move. Then, with a trembling sigh, he pushed the bag sideways, still keeping one small hand on the strap, but letting her take the other. She slid it gently from his lap onto hers, careful and slow so he could change his mind. "Letters?" she asked quietly, already knowing. "And her Bible," he whispered. She pressed her palm lightly against the worn canvas, reverent. "She gave you everything she could." Eli nodded, and then, almost imperceptibly, leaned into her shoulder. That was the first true yielding. A small boy letting his weight rest somewhere safe after miles of carrying everything alone. Sarah wrapped one arm around him, the bag together, cradling both as if they were the same fragile, priceless thing. "It's safe now," she murmured. "Both you and this." His breath hitched, but it wasn't panic this time. It sounded like release. Ramirez stood just inside the doorway, hat in hand, giving them space but unwilling to leave before the moment found its shape. She watched the woman anchor the boy in his bundle of survival. It was one of those scenes that made the long hours and hard calls worth it. Eli's fingers twitched once, as though checking for letters. When he felt the bag still under Sarah's arm, he relaxed more, shoulders dropping in a way Ramirez hadn't seen all day. "I kept them safe," he said into the fabric of his aunt's sweater. "You did," Sarah whispered fiercely. "You got here, and you came." "I'll always come," she said, a quiet oath. They sat like that a long while, no rush to unpack stories or explain. Ramirez could almost see the miles peeling away from him. Wet asphalt, the roar of trucks, the locked bedroom door left behind. She stepped quietly back, but before she left, Sarah looked up, eyes bright with tears, and mouthed a thank you. Ramirez gave a small nod, the kind meant to say it's all right, just keep him safe. As she closed the door softly behind her, she caught one last glimpse. The boy tucked into safe arms at last, the battered pack finally off his back, but close enough to touch, and a home willing to hold both child and the fragile cargo he had carried alone for so long. Ramirez didn't walk straight to the cruiser after the door shut. Instead, she stayed on the porch, boots planted against the wide boards that creaked softly under her weight. Through the window glass, she could see shapes moving. The boy folded into his aunt's side, the woman still holding both him and the pack. It wasn't her home to step into, but it was her call to make sure no one could undo what they'd just built. The CPS car pulled up a few minutes later, tires crunching softly on gravel. Maya climbed out, carrying a leather portfolio, and Tom followed with a tablet and an old-fashioned clipboard. They looked up at Ramirez for quiet confirmation before knocking. She waved them forward but kept her voice low. "He's with her. Let's do this carefully." Sarah answered when the knock came, eyes red but steadier now, one arm still around Eli's small frame. "Come in?" she asked. "If you're ready," Ramirez said. "We'll be quick." Inside, the living room had shifted. The boy was on the couch, shoes off, head tipped toward the ticking clock. The backpack sat beside him, but not clenched. Sarah guided him to sit, while she perched on the arm of the couch, hand still on his shoulder. Maya took the lead, crouching so she wasn't towering over anyone. "Hi again, Eli. We just need to make sure everything's official, so you can stay here with your aunt and not have to go anywhere else." His brow furrowed. "Not go back." "Not go back," Ramirez said firmly, stepping into his line of hearing. "This is about making that safe." Tom pulled out the protective order paperwork first, reading each part in simple language. "The judge signed this. It says your father can't come here or try to take you. Police will know if he tries. You're protected." Sarah's eyes welled, but she stayed steady. She asked careful, adult questions. What to do if he shows up, who to call, how long the order lasts. Ramirez answered each one, slow and clear, until Sarah nodded and signed the last page with shaking but determined hand. Next came the temporary custody forms. Emergency placement with known family. Maya explained them directly to Eli as well, patient with the legal tangle. "This says you get to live here with your aunt while the longer papers get finished. You'll have someone from our office check on you, but you won't be moved unless it's unsafe. And we don't think it will be." Eli listened, head tilted, then whispered, "I can stay." "You can stay," Ramirez said, softer than she meant to. "Your mom's letters worked." Sarah's hands tightened on the pen as she signed, then pulled a tissue from her pocket and laughed once through her tears. "My sister would have loved to see how stubborn you are," she whispered to the boy. Ramirez signed as witness, her name joining the chain that said this child belonged in safety now. She took a long moment with the line before she wrote, aware of the weight behind it. This was the signature that closed the gap between a busy road and a warm house. When the last page slid into the folder, Tom stood and gave Sarah a business card. Follow-up visit in a week, just to check you both have what you need. Call us sooner if anything changes. Sarah nodded, clinging to the card like a lifeline. Thank you, all of you. Maya smiled at Eli. You did something brave today. You asked for safe. He ducked his head and murmured, I just walked. That's brave, Maya said gently. Ramirez stayed a little longer than protocol required. She helped Sarah program emergency numbers into her phone, walked her through protective order in plain language, and checked that the doors and locks worked. It wasn't distrust, just a quiet habit of making sure things hold. Outside, dusk softened the yard, leaves spinning down from the maple. Ramirez lingered under the porch light, not ready to leave but knowing she should. She could hear faint voices behind the door. Sarah telling Eli about his room upstairs, about the quilt she'd found that used to be his mother's. His small, tired voice answering just enough to let her know he was listening. Maya and Tom waved as they headed back to their car. You good? Maya asked quietly. Ramirez nodded. He's good now. When the last engine faded down the road, she stayed one more minute, hand brushing the porch railing. She thought about the early call. A trucker's voice full of unease, a child's small silhouette against roaring traffic. She thought of the way Eli had held that backpack like armor, how every step of trust had taken work. And she thought of the woman inside now holding both boy and burden with the kind of care that could heal. Finally, she exhaled, long and slow, and walked to her cruiser. Before sliding behind the wheel, she glanced back once more. Through the window, she caught a sliver of the living room. Sarah crouched to help Eli feel his way up the first step, one hand on the banister, the other on her shoulder. The backpack trailed gently at his side, no longer shield but belonging. That was enough. Ramirez started the car and let it idle a moment, headlights washing gold over the gravel before turning toward the main road. Paperwork done, promises made, but something deeper too, a thread tied back together, strong enough to hold through the night. The gravel drive was a muted gray ribbon under the fading sky when Ramirez finally shifted the cruiser into gear. For long while she hadn't moved, just sat behind the wheel watching the thin glow of the porch light and the dark silhouettes inside the house. She could see the faint suggestion of Sarah's arm around the boy as they turned toward the stairs, a careful shape guiding another. When the last scrap of movement stilled, she let herself breathe. Then the engine hummed awake and the car rolled slowly backward, tires whispering over stone until the yard and its single maple fell behind. The road out of Greenfield wound between fields already silvered by dusk. Ramirez drove without the radio, windows cracked just enough to let in the cool autumn air. It smelled of leaves and damp earth, a world settling for the night. She thought of how the day had begun. The dispatch crackle, a trucker's voice describing a kid alone on County Road 9, blind and almost swallowed by morning traffic. She pictured again that first glimpse, a small figure on the edge of the asphalt, cane tapping, backpack clenched, trucks thundering by indifferent. Her chest tightened at the memory of how easily he could have disappeared, how close to nobody's business of life can become when fear keeps it quiet. She let the scenes replay, not to dwell, but to honor the thread of them. The first careful words on the roadside, her voice steady so he wouldn't step into danger. The way he whispered his name like a secret. The letters pulled close and guarded. The courage it took to unzip that bag and show the plan his mother left behind. Each moment felt fragile now that the urgency had passed, delicate, but also unbreakable because the boy had carried it this far. The cruiser crested a low hill, and she saw the lights of the highway miles off. She thought of the paperwork signed on the porch, all the signatures and seals meant to keep what had just been built from unraveling. Necessary, yes, but she knew it wasn't ink that had saved him. It was a mother's foresight and a child's stubborn hope, a trucker's phone call, a dispatcher's unease, a day of quiet choices to stop and help instead of drive past. She flexed her hands on the wheel, feeling the small tremor there now that adrenaline was gone. Her eyes flicked once to the passenger seat where her hat lay. In its band, she'd tucked a spare copy of the protective order just in case. She found herself smiling faintly at the overpreparedness, the old habit of making sure a child isn't left undefended. Somewhere in her chest, the day's weight began to shift from tension into a steadier ache, the kind that comes after hard work that mattered. As she turned onto the main road, the first stars pricked through the indigo sky. She wondered if Eli, upstairs in that unfamiliar house, could feel night settling safely around him. Maybe his aunt had found the lamp with the pull chain. Maybe she'd shown him where the bathroom was. Maybe she'd sat beside his bed and let him trace the room with his hands until it wasn't foreign anymore. Ramirez pictured the backpack now resting near a nightstand, its secret cargo finally in a place that could be opened without fear. She reached for the memory of his last words before she left. "You did the hard part, Eli." "I just drove," she told him. But really she knew that wasn't quite true. Driving was the easy part. Staying, listening, waiting while trust assembled itself. That was the work. And he had met her halfway with more bravery than most adults could muster. A slow breath escaped her, fogging the windshield for a heartbeat before the defroster cleared it. In the quiet of the car, she whispered, not for anyone but herself, "Home." It wasn't her home, not her family, but the word felt right. A boy alone on a road had found his way back to one. By the time she hit the highway, the sky had gone full dark. Red taillights ahead marked other travelers heading somewhere safe or somewhere unknown. Her own taillights trailed behind her, fading from the house's view until only the night remained. Inside the cruiser, Ramirez sat taller. The exhaustion of the day held alongside a deep, almost private relief. Some calls leave you carrying unsolved pieces. This one, against the odds, had ended where it should, with doors opening, arms waiting, and letters that reached across distance to deliver a child back to family. She drove on, headlights cutting a sure path through the dark, and let the road unwind beneath her wheels. Another shift, another night, but this time with the quiet satisfaction of having seen a life pulled back from the edge and placed gently where it belonged.